What's up, you beautiful freaks? This is my video explaining the plot of The Raven King by Nora Sakavic. These are my beautiful, lovely fan casts for all the characters. Oh my god, let me get my pointing stick. These are my wonderful fan casts for all the characters. If you need a refresher, we will go through slowly, okay? I just want to say at the top of this, I have a couple of disclaimers and just some information. If you don't know what I'm talking about the second book in the Foxhole Court series. The first video on the Foxhole Court is already live on my page, so go on ahead and go watch that and then come back and cozy on up and watch this, okay? I promise you this one is going to be a long one, so you're going to want to grab a cup of tea and maybe a notepad so you can write down what's going on. I will link the book series down below in the description because Nora Sakavic deserves a Pulitzer Prize. Second little piece of housekeeping. Why did this video take me so long to post? My goal when I put up the first Foxhole Court video in August was to have the second one out in September. That didn't end up happening. If you don't know, why would you? Because I never talk about it. I am in graduate school in Scotland right now, and I got some rather devastating news about my program progression somewhere thereabouts in July. And August and September were mostly spent trying to get in contact with the school to clarify what was going on and crying because I was sad. Essentially, because of various machinations, I have had to defer my program end date. I was supposed to finish on the 31st of August. Instead, now I'm finishing sometime next year. I'm not 100% clear on what time next year that will be. And that has messed up a lot of my future plans, and it really messed with my mental health. Not to mention that my funding was lasting from whenever I got here to the 31st of August. And here we are on the 21st of October. I bet you're wondering how I'm standing here in front of you. A lot of days where I was having sleep for dinner. A lot of hours spent sobbing and calling my friends to see if they could throw me some bucks so that I could feed myself and pay my rent. And a lot of mental health issues that made it almost impossible for me to focus on things that I really wanted to do, like making this video. This series is so important to me, and I wanted to make this video to the best of my ability, and I didn't want to phone it in. And I felt that I was going to phone it in if I was drying my tears, standing up on an empty stomach, and just going through all of this. I'm in a slightly more steady place. I'm still trying to figure out if I can get my funding extended since my program has been extended, but I have a job for now. But that doesn't mean I don't need help. So I have, as usual, linked in my description the GoFundMe that I started when I said that I was moving abroad to go to graduate school, and the links to my Cash App, PayPal, and Venmo. If you're asking yourself, why would you go to graduate school if you couldn't afford it? I could until they told me that I had to extend my program, and I didn't know that. Too scared, sad, and prideful to ask for help. So now that's what I'm doing. If you want to shame me, make sure you shame me in a comment that is at least 160 characters so that it lends to my engagement. Basically why it's taking me so long to get this video out. I just wasn't in the right mind space. I forgot to say this during this part, but if I ever start getting sponsors, you whores better click on them. You better click on them, okay? I'm not some greedy influencer who just wants sponsors and to get paid for this. I'm actually living in poverty currently. Is this the e-begging that Simply Nessa was talking about? No, it's okay. I'm saying if there ever is an eventuality where there is a sponsor on this channel, it will be because that is a brand that I truly stand behind and really enjoy. Because desperation does not cancel out discernment. Therefore, you whores better click on them. The last little housekeeping bit that I have to say before we move on to the meat of this video. This is a very, very triggering book. This particular book in this series, a lot of things happen in it that if you have experienced trauma in your life would probably be difficult for you to read or listen to. or maybe it wouldn't. You know what your triggers are. I'm just saying I would like to warn you at the top. Trigger warnings for, and I always hate doing these because I have to censor myself because it's the beginning of a YouTube video. Mistreatment of children, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually. Trigger warning for great on page, okay. Trigger warning for mental health issues, severe mental illness. And then there's also just like a whole slew of different levels of like fear of the LG rainbow community. I literally hate this. I hope you can see how much I hate this. Fear of the rainbow community and dislike of women, all up and through this book. So if any of that is going to upset you, that's really fine. You can skip this one. Or if you would like to help me and you don't have no cash, I understand. Okay. I know what it's like to have somebody on the internet be like, I need help. And me be sitting there like, damn, I wish I had literally even $1 just to throw you, but I don't. Play this in the background on mute. That helps a lot, actually. Those are all my disclaimers. Without further ado, we are going to get right into The Raven King. Okay, so let me reintroduce you to my fan casts for all of the Foxes. Right in the center, we have Mr. Neil Josten himself, / Nathaniel. I don't know if we've found out exactly what his last name is, so I'm not going to spoil that, but we know that his real first name is Nathaniel. He is on the run. This is his childhood idol / almost teammate, Kevin, who used to play for the Edgar Allan Poe Ravens until his ex-best friend / owner, because we're dealing with mob bosses and Yakuza and all of that type stuff, Rico Moriyamas, shattered his left hand and he had to leave the Ravens because he was afraid for his life. Okay. This is Andrew Minyard. He is a tiny, angry, mentally unstable goalie for the Foxes, who is also Kevin's protection, because the thing is, Andrew doesn't care about anything. He doesn't have anything to lose, so he's not scared of the Moriyamas like everyone else would normally be. This is Andrew's twin brother, Aaron. We're going to figure out the whole deal with them very soon. And this is their cousin, Nikki. Nikki is half Mexican, half white. That's why he's Latino and Andrew and Aaron are white. Okay, yeah. This is Renee. Renee is a born-again Christian. She should have rainbow tips in the hair, but this is like the best picture that I could find of Jessie Maylee with a bob, so this is what we went with. This is the team captain, Dan Wild. Cutie patootie. Love her so much. She's literally my queen. This is Dan's boyfriend, Matt, who is a defensive dealer, I believe, on the team. Reliable, sweet, fun, delicious. This is Allison Reynolds. Think of her as kind of like the Paris Hilton of this world. If Paris Hilton had decided that instead of being a hotel magnate and like socialite and social media personality, she was going to play Division I in a sport in college. And then these are the personnel for the team. In the center, we have Coach Wymack. On his right, we have the team nurse, Abby. And on his left, we have the team shrink / therapist, Betsy B. Dobson. Last and certainly least, we have Brian Seth Gordon, aka Seth. At the beginning of this series, the whole team, they're reeling from the news that they have lost one of their teammates. It appears, at least this is Andrew's theory, that Rico Moriyamas has called out a hit against one of the Foxes because Neil went on national television and mouthed off to Rico. And because their team is so small, they're literally one alternate in their team, losing a singular person could really mess up their season. So what ends up happening? Poor Seth, an overdose. Aw. How sad. Now, Neil is shook. And he's not shook because he really cared about Seth. No one except Allison, because Allison was Seth's girlfriend. No one particularly cared about or cared for Seth. He was very grumpy. He was mean. He was always starting fights with the twins and Kevin. He was kind of like the other side of the wall. There's a split between the Foxes as I've laid them out. These are the monsters, okay? The twins, Kevin, and Nikki, with Neil sometimes subbing in because Neil is like being trained by Kevin. And then these are the upperclassmen. And Seth played the role that Andrew and Aaron played for a long time for the upperclassmen. Seth was like, I hate those motherfuckers. And Andrew and Aaron were like, I hate those motherfuckers too. So they would kind of like keep each other, or keep the two groups apart. So Neil is like mostly apathetic about Seth passing because Seth never really made any kind of effort to get to know him or even really be kind to him. But Seth also was his roommate. Seth slept in the room with Neil and Matt. So Neil is just kind of like, oh. He's also seen a lot of death in his life. So he's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. He overdosed. Like, he was a junkie. But also he has what Andrew has said to him at the end of the last book, like playing over and over in his head, which is that Seth's is Neil's fault because Neil talked BS to Rico at the Kathy Vreeland, Ireland? I don't remember what the hell her name is. The Kathy, whatever her name is, show. And he was talking crazy to him about the Foxes and how the Ravens suck and he's not as intimidating as he thinks he is. Andrew believes that Rico called out the hit on Seth to make it so that the team was literally down to the last man. Like, they don't have any subs now for the rest of the season. Oh yeah, what game are they playing? It's Exy. It's a made-up game that Nora Sakavic created in her beautiful, gorgeous mind. So when we open the book, we pick up on the Wednesday after the first book ends. The first book ends, I think, on a Sunday morning, and this book picks up on a Wednesday. Everyone is at practice, or they're heading to practice, and Allison isn't there because she's still grieving Seth's loss. Again, he was her boyfriend, even though they were on and off again, even though they were really like dysfunctional, he's still her boyfriend. The team was supposed to get together this Sunday, like the day after Seth passed, but Andrew and Matt ended up getting into this knockdown, drag-out fight, and they had to split up. The upperclassmen stayed with team nurse Abby at her apartment. The monsters stayed at the dorm, and Neil was sent to stay with Coach Wymack because Neil was sleeping in the room with Seth along with Matt, and the school had to come in and like get Seth's stuff, clean up the room, all of that. And this is kind of like the perfect symbolic representation of the team. It's the monsters on one side of campus, the upperclassmen on the other side, and Neil somewhere straddling the middle with Coach Wymack. It's important too because it kind of signals the role that Neil is going to play in the series moving forward. So Seth's ashes end up going to Allison because his mom is like, she like can't be bothered to pick them up from the crematorium. And now that we're on Wednesday of this week, the second game of the season is coming up in 2 days. One of the things that amazed me about this book series is how much happens in how little time. So the first book takes place from May of 2006 to late August of 2006. And then this book that we're on right now takes place from late August of 2006 through to I think like January of 2007. Really short, truncated periods of time for how much is happening over the course of this series. So the security code to the practice building is being changed like every 2 weeks, and Neil has clocked that this week it's the last 4 digits of Abby's phone number, and he's like, maybe the team is onto something and these two are canoodling. When Neil gets into the locker room, the monsters are rearranging the chairs. They always had sat in a very particular arrangement. It was the three of the monsters, so Aaron, Kevin, and Andrew on one couch, and then Nikki on a chair. And when they get in, they're moving the couch that the twins and Kevin usually sit on and putting a chair on either side of that couch so that Neil can sit on the couch with them. Aaron takes up one chair, the chair that's closer to the door. Nikki is left with the chair on the opposite side, and then the upperclassmen have the couch that is like across the room from the setup that the monsters have done. And when Neil comes in, he's like, what the hell are you guys doing? And they're like, it's very obvious what we're doing, don't act dumb. And he realizes that they're kind of like claiming him in this moment as one of theirs. He has to sit on one end of the couch, Kevin sits on the other end of the couch, and then Andrew is going to sit in the middle. While this is all happening, Wymack is fielding calls from the press, and he is super annoyed because they keep asking them what they're going to do about the season now that Seth is gone. And he's like, I don't want to talk about this. Like, I literally just lost a player. We're still trying to figure out what we're going to do. Please. And he already doesn't like the press to begin with. So he's like, please leave me alone. Dan comes in, and she is really annoyed about the new seating arrangement. arrangement that the monsters have set up, because she sees it as furthering the division amongst the team instead of like using Seth's passing as like a come together point for all of them. And then Wymack comes into the room once everyone is in there. So like everyone has filed in except for Allison, because she's out that day, and Andrew because I think he's still at the treatment center where Betsy gives him his weekly appointments. So basically everyone is in there except two of them. And so Wymack gives one of his characteristic stern pep talks. These are not peppy. They are talks, but there's no pep in these talks. He's basically like, look, Seth died and that's sad. I'm surprised he made it this long. He doesn't say it that callously, you know, but it's kind of like Seth was the last remaining player from Wymack's first year as a coach, because they had these like weird contract issues, and also because there were people who were like leaving because they didn't want to be on the worst team in the league anymore. And so Seth was the only one who made it to be a fifth year senior. They have fifth year seniors in this sport because they need the people on the team for 5 years, I guess. So it's kind of like it hurts Wymack, but he's not like the most emotional person. So he doesn't like betray that hurt to the team. He basically is like, it's great that we got him for as long as we got him, but if you're going to use his death as an excuse to start bullshitting, you're not going to do it on my watch. In fact, he wants them to use the loss of Seth as a way to propel the team forward instead of holding the team back. So they all like break, they go out into the dressing rooms, and Neil, as usual, is dressing in a bathroom stall. And when he comes out, he looks in the mirror, and we learn that the reason that he hates his reflection is because he looks exactly like his freakish dad, the Butcher of Baltimore. King Kevin, being so sensitive and so like kind as he always is talking about how he's like, damn, Seth's death is really gonna hurt our chances of like moving forward this season. And Matt calls him out for being insensitive, basically, because he's like, the only reason you care about Seth dying is because he's gonna hurt our chances in this XE league. It's not because you like actually give a crap about him, you know? And once they're like finally done changing, Wymack gets a call from the police for Andrew. By this point, Andrew has returned from Betsy's and he's getting ready with the whole team. They're all getting ready to go into the Foxhole Court so that they can practice. And Wymack is like, why are the police from Oakland calling me? What's going on? He's confused because Andrew hasn't lived in Oakland for 3 years. So there's no way that he possibly could have committed a crime there. But Andrew is like, I don't know. He's like brushing it off. He's like, whatever. And then Wymack says it's Higgins on the phone. Oh yeah, Andrew also drops the iconic quote, "It wasn't me, it was the one-armed man." And I was like, oh my God, not a Twin Peaks head. Oh. But when Wymack says that it's Higgins on the phone, Andrew is like, okay, I will take the phone call. Whatever. And I think this is a good time to insert my initial read of Andrew. Initially, when I read through the book, I encountered Andrew and he was kind of like an enigma to me. Like, I could not understand his character. I couldn't read him. What I read a lot of the time is like anger and annoyance and apathy. When I was rereading it for this video, and I listened to the audiobook when I was rereading it, and if you've never listened to the audiobook, they give him like a surfer dude accent because he's from California. Mind you, he's from Oakland. He's not from like San Diego. But listening to the audiobook for this video, I was like, oh, there's a lot more depth and texture to Andrew as a character in these moments than I was originally assigning to him, simply because I guess I found him to be so like frustrating. I was really in Neil's point of view and really like encountering Andrew from this point of view of like, he's like an enigma wrapped in a puzzle, shoved in a chimera, you know, that, or whatever that saying is. Like, I was like, what's going on with you? Like, what are you doing? But then listening to it again, it's like, as soon as he hears Higgins' name, you realize he's like, okay, this is probably something important, so let me just get on the phone with him. He answers the phone to a police officer who he calls Pig Higgins, and while he's talking on the phone, whatever Higgins asks him to do, he says no, hangs up, and tries to leave. Then Higgins calls again, and he's like, I'm not gonna do it. Like, whatever it is that you want, I'm not doing it. Then he hangs up again. Higgins like keeps calling back. Andrew at some point says to him, he's like, yeah, well, she's not supposed to have kids in the house. And that's kind of his response to whatever Higgins is asking him for. So who is Higgins? Higgins is the Oakland police officer from the PAL program who basically got Andrew into Exie. He was helping at-risk youth in Oakland by putting them into sports. And that's where his initial relationship with Andrew formulated. Whatever they were talking about on the phone upsets Andrew so much that he's like, I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. And the coach and Kevin both try and stop him and say, like, you can't go. This is our first practice since losing Seth. Like, it's really important. And he basically threatens to injure himself so badly that he can never play Exie again. He starts punching his fist into a wall and it starts bleeding, and then they just have to let him go because he's really going to do it. Like, he doesn't really care about Exie so much as he cares about like having something to keep his attention on because of his medication, but we'll get into his medication later. And once Andrew is gone, Aaron says to them, they're like, Aaron is talking to Nikki and Nikki's like, is that Higgins, the same Higgins who, and then Aaron's like, yeah, he's the Higgins who told me I have a brother. Of course, all of the Foxes are like, what you talk about, Willis? Because I don't know if you can tell, but they have the same face. I know this one is Aegon Targaryen. I just think it's funny to have Aaron be Aegon Targaryen because he's such a little shit and he like brings this rancid energy to every room that he's in. But these are the same person. So everyone on the Foxes is like, what do you mean he told you you have a brother? You gestated in the same womb. You are twins. But like no one really asks Aaron because they all have their own like complicated pasts, you know, so they don't really like dig into each other's past, but they're all just looking around like, what the fuck is going on? So the Foxes have their practice without Andrew and without Seth too. And unfortunately, they're starting to realize something that is kind of sad and kind of hard to accept, which is that the practice is going fairly well without Seth there. They like leave practice. They don't really talk about it at this moment. And they get back to Fox Tower and Andrew is sitting on the curb. And when the upperclassmen pull up in Matt's truck, he goes to Renee and he's like, let's go. And he pulls Renee away and they like walk off into the distance. And Neil is basically like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is happening? Aaron is not having any of that. He's not going with Andrew. Like they basically don't have any kind of relationship, and Neil hasn't been able to figure out why until now. But Aaron walks off, goes somewhere else, and it's left so that it's just Kevin, Neil, Nikki, Dan, and Matt. So this is the first time that Neil and Matt are going back to their room since Seth has been gone. And because Dan and Matt are dating each other, she's like there for support, but it's kind of weird and awkward because Kevin and Nikki come along too, and they don't normally like hang out with the upperclassmen. I think it's mostly just like everything's kind of weird. Andrew and Renee are off doing something. Aaron has walked off. Allison is with Betsy, I think, like crying herself to sleep or whatever. And so they're kind of like the leftovers of the monsters. So they just go with Neil. It's sad because they can kind of feel the absence of Seth and the fact that like his stuff is gone from the room, you know, like his bed is gone, his desk is gone, and it's the emptiness that is holding his presence. So everybody sits down, they start drinking rum and cokes and having dinner, they put on a movie, and they're just kind of like coexisting, and everyone is like, this is weird. This is when we finally get the story of what happened to Aaron and Andrew that got them separated at birth, because Nikki's there, and he is like, Dan basically asked him like, what the fuck was Aaron talking about? That's when he told me I had a brother. So Aaron and Andrew's mom, Tilda, had given up Andrew at birth. She had the twins and she gave up Andrew at birth, and she raised Aaron on his own in San Jose as an only child, never telling him that he had a twin brother. They're living in San Jose. His mom starts dating this guy who lives in Oakland, and he wants to take her and her son out to a Raiders game. So she's like, yeah, sure. They drive up to Oakland and they go to the Raiders game, and this police officer walks up to Aaron and is like, Andrew, let's go. Aaron is like, what are you talking about? My name's not Andrew. And that police officer was Officer Higgins. Officer Higgins is like, oh, he has a twin? So in Higgins' mind, he's like, oh, they must have gotten separated at birth. So he gets Aaron to take him back to his mom, thinking that Tilda, who is Andrew and Aaron's biological mother, is a foster mom. And he says, I think I know his twin. They must have gotten separated at birth, separated in the system somehow. Here's my phone number. She like asks for the phone number of Andrew's foster family, and they're gonna set up a meeting at some point. Well, when Andrew's foster mother calls to set up the meeting, Tilda picks up the phone and she's like, I don't want anything to do with him. Get away from me and never call me back again. Aaron, so, okay, if you were born after 2000, which honestly is only 2 years younger than me, but all of my siblings are older than I am, so yeah, it's only 2 years younger than me. We used to have this thing called landlines. So the way that you have a phone in your pocket, that's basically a computer that you carry around. Yeah, we didn't have that. So you would have a landline in your house, and I think this sounds so, I know you know how phones work, but like you would pick up the phone, and in some houses, in most houses, I think, all the lines were connected. So if you picked up the phone in one room and you picked up the phone in another room, if somebody was on the phone in that first room, you could hear whatever it was that they were talking about in the other room. So Aaron picks up the phone in his mom's bedroom while she's on the phone downstairs, and he hears her telling Andrew's foster mother, "Leave me alone, I don't want anything to do with him." And he's like, "What the fuck? I have a twin brother, what's going on?" So he calls the Oakland Police Department to get in touch because Higgins had come up to him at the game. He was a police officer. He's like, "I want to get to know my brother." Higgins gives him Andrew's address. Aaron writes a letter to Andrew, and Andrew basically tells him to F off. Then Andrew's foster mom at the time writes Aaron a letter and is like, "Look, there's a lot of changes happening in the house right now. The holidays are a hard time for him. Just try again a little bit later on in the year." And this is like, yeah, this is around like Christmas, New Year's time of, I think, 2001. What is when this is supposed to be happening? Well, by March, Andrew is in juvie. So Aaron has missed his shot to get in contact with his brother. And soon after that, Aaron's mom, Tilda, moves him to Columbia, South Carolina, which is where Nikki lives with her brother. Nikki is Tilda's brother's son. So when they're in Columbia, Nikki's dad, who is Aaron and Andrew's uncle, finds out that it's not just Aaron, there's also an Andrew. So he's like, "I gotta go find this kid." He flies out to California to interview Andrew's foster family, to meet Andrew, and he also flies Aaron out to meet his brother for the first time. So they have like a 30-minute meet and greet in the juvenile hall, and then he brings Aaron back home to Columbia. When Andrew gets early parole, Nikki's dad basically forces his sister to bring Andrew home to live with his mom and his brother. And that was, I think, 3 years prior. This was when the twins were like 16 years old. So that's why they've only known each other for 3 years. They met 5 years prior, but they've only like really known each other for 3 years. So everyone is reeling from this information because what a weird story. This is not like the sister separated at birth story. Like, no, this is some real negligent and honestly evil parenting on Andrew and Aaron's mom's part. Like, what do you mean you only kept one baby? You had twins and you only kept one baby? That's evil. And it kind of helps Neil understand why their relationship is so fraught, even though they're twins and they should be really close. Or that's kind of like the stereotype. So they're all hanging out, they're eating dinner, they're watching a movie, and Nikki is having a great time because Nikki's been wanting to hang out with the other team members for a really long time, but he's stayed away because he wants to like be loyal to and like really take care of Aaron and Andrew. Kevin and Nikki end up leaving and going back to their room. They say goodnight after the hangout, and Dan and Matt are still in the room with Neil. Dan starts talking to Matt, and she's really uncomfortable because she's realized and is finally saying out loud the thing that like nobody really wanted to acknowledge, which is that the team is kind of better off without Seth. Poor Seth. Like, most of the conflict on the court was instigated by Seth. He was very aggressive, and he was the wall in between the upperclassmen and the monsters. So like, the upperclassmen were always willing to reach out, but Seth would get in the way. Now the wall between the monsters and the upperclassmen is Aaron and Andrew. But Aaron and Andrew are kind of like known entities. They can be controlled in a way, not controlled, but they can be worked with in a way that Seth can't. And so she's asking like, what could this mean for our season? And she feels really bad about it because Allison is devastated. Seth is dead. And I gotta say, like, 5 out of 9 of these guys don't really give a fuck. they don't really like care about him that much, and the fact that he's gone. Ooh. Dan and Matt then turn to Neil, and they're basically like, they're like, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Like, he is the only kind of still floating chess piece on the board. The last time that they had an opportunity to reach out to the monsters was whenever Kevin joined the team the year prior, because it had just been Aaron, Andrew, and Nikki together, and they were a stone cold wall because they're all family. And Nikki was like, I'm going to do whatever the twins want me to do because they're my family and I want them to know that I support them. When Kevin joined, Dan was like, okay, maybe we have an in, but then Kevin and Seth hated each other, and Andrew ended up swallowing up Kevin into the monsters group. So now that Neil is there, he hasn't been swallowed completely. So Dan is like, don't get swallowed. You are our only opportunity to bridge this gap between us and make an actual team out of this motley crew of freaks. So Neil is like, okay, I guess I'll try my best. And it's like weighing on him because he knows that there is an expiration date to his time on the Foxes. Again, if I have forgotten to introduce the stakes for you at the beginning of this video, let me take a second to do it again. This is a young man who spent the first 18 years of his life on the run from his father, who is a Baltimore mob boss and controls a swathe of territory from DC all the way up through Newark, okay? Him and his mom were on the run for 5 full years, and his dad was chasing him down every second. They were barely getting away from him. All right. His dad's people finally catch up to them in Seattle, and his mom, who spent this whole time beating him and psychologically torturing him so that he never makes any attachments to anyone outside of her so that he can keep himself safe, gets pew-pewed. And she somehow manages to drive them down from Seattle to California. And then in her dying words is telling him, like, don't get caught up. It's okay. Just stay on the run. Like, she is... I always do my Mary voice. Someone told me last time that I sounded Australian. I can do an Australian accent. I don't whip it out as much because I haven't practiced in a long time. That was a bit New Zealandy, wasn't it? I don't know. I've got to watch more Australian YouTubers. I think that would help me get it right again. But anyways, yeah, someone said it sounded Australian. But like, she's basically telling him, like, protect yourself. Remember what I taught you. And he's like, okay. And then he goes to school for a year and he can't stop himself from playing the sport that would link him to his father, because the last time he saw his father, he was doing an XC trial for the Edgar Allan Poe Ravens team, and that's when he met Kevin. So he starts playing XC, and then Kevin shows up to recruit him for the Foxes. Oh yeah, and Rico was there too. So these two people know him, but they don't recognize him because he's dyed his hair brown and he's wearing brown contacts. He's like, I think he's naturally a redhead and has blue eyes. But he puts himself directly in harm's way, and then he decides that he is going to play for the lowest ranked team on the most watched televised sport in the United States and somehow remain undercover. There's only 9 of these guys. There was 10, but they done killed Seth. So now there's only 9 of them. Who are you going to hide behind? Nobody. So, yeah, Neil is like, the stakes are really high because I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep up this act as Neil Josten. And I'm reading and I'm like, baby, the act went out the window the second that you got on that stage and sat next to that surly Japanese man and called him everything but a child of God. The act is gone, but he's still living in La La Land. It's like his mom was right to be concerned on the run with him, is all I'll say. She was right to be concerned on the run with him because the first opportunity he has, she did everything she could to keep him away from Exie because she knew him being anywhere near Exie was going to immediately set off flags for the Ravens because they tried to recruit him when he was 11, 13. I don't remember how old he was, but they tried to recruit him. First thing he does as soon as she's gone, let me go play Exie. Oh, please. So yeah, Neil is like, okay, I guess I'll try and bridge the gap. That'll be my little project for the year until I have to run away. Dan and Matt are watching him do his homework, and they're like, how many classes are you taking? Like, this is crazy. And he's like, I'm taking 6. That's a full class load, right? And they're like, for a regular student, not for someone who's playing class 1 XE, they help him cut down his course load. They're being like mom and dad, basically. Mom and dad, because his mom and dad suck. The one thing that did make me sad was that he hates history. And if you don't know, I'm in graduate school right now, studying history. That did hurt my heart. But then Renee comes into the room because that's where Dan is. And she's got a limp and a bunch of bruises on her hand. And Neil is like, what the fuck is going on? What is happening? Because essentially, like, all he can think of is that Andrew took her away and went and beat her. And then now she's just coming back. This is when he finds out that Renee and Andrew are sparring partners, and they basically like box whenever Andrew's feeling upset or like has emotions that he's not really able to deal with. And then in this moment, Renee finally calls Neil out for being uncomfortable around her. She's like, well, you never like to talk to me. You never look me in the eye. So, and he's like, it's not that I don't like you. It's that I don't get you. He's basically like trying to put together the puzzle pieces that are Renee. She's got this rainbow tipped dyed black bob. She wears a cross necklace everywhere she goes. They're saying that her past is even worse than Andrew's, but he's like, she's also the sweetest person on the team, and she like leads with her Christianity and her kindness. So what's going on? He doesn't understand her, and when he doesn't understand people, he gets really uncomfortable and he tries to stay away from them because he thinks that they're probably hiding something and it's safest for him to be far away from them. And Renee is basically like cautiously optimistic that at some point he'll get over himself and finally allow himself to get to know her. Renee and Dan leave. Matt stays in the room to go to bed, and Kevin comes to pick up Neil for their night practices as usual. Once again, remember, Kevin is drilling Neil on Ravens drills because Kevin knows that Neil has the potential to go to court. Court is what they call like professional XE playing, if he wants to. So if Neil decides that he would like to go court, he can do that. So Kevin is trying to make him the best player that he possibly can make him in the short time that they have together, and also make it so that the Foxes don't completely get slaughtered this season. Excuse me. Going into their first game of the season, everyone is like still feeling really bad about how much better practices are going without Seth. Allison is preparing herself for this next game. She's decided that she doesn't want to sit it out. She's going to play on the team. But there are serious shakeups that are going to happen to the lineup because they no longer have Seth as an alternate. Andrew gives Neil very clear instructions. He says, stay within Kevin's line of sight and keep Kevin's attention. Because the only thing stopping Kevin from like getting out of Dodge is having a project and having something to focus on. And Andrew knows that. And Andrew is committed to keeping Kevin safe because he promised that he would. So Neil is Kevin's project. So Neil has to stay in Kevin's line of sight and keep him engaged in XE. Neil is also really nervous to see Allison because he rightfully blames himself for Seth's death. As at this point, Andrew's theory about Rico and the Moriyamas, if you can't see Rico, I cut him out, he's not super important yet. But Andrew's theory about Rico and the Moriyamas taking out a hit on Seth is looking more and more accurate based off of all the information that we have about the Moriyamas. Allison, it's kind of clear that she also blames Neil for Seth's passing because she won't stop staring at him her first practice back with the team, and Neil is like, stop looking at me. Like, he is so silly. He thinks he's so slick. He's like, Renee is like, I know you don't really like me. I know I make you uncomfortable. And he's like, how did she know that? You're not slick, Neil Josten. You're very much so not. Someone had asked me in the comments of my last Foxhole Court video why I think he's not a good liar. And I think it's because of moments like this where he thinks he's getting away with things, and at every turn, people confront him. He'll be like, Renee makes me uncomfortable, like in his head. And then Renee will be like, yeah, I know I make you uncomfortable. And he'll be like, oh my God, how did you know that? And it's like, it's because it's on your head. It's very plainly on your face. She can tell. he was talking to Andrew last book, and Andrew was like, I know you're lying, but not about what, but I don't care because some of it is the truth. Like, they know when he's lying, they just ignore him. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction for him, down to him saying like he's fine when he's not. Like, he could be hurt and he'll just say I'm fine, and everyone knows that he's not telling the truth, but they just let him slide because they're like, okay, yeah, this is what Neil does. We're getting into me trying to explain sport, and if this was a sport that existed, maybe I could get there. But this is a sport that doesn't exist. So I'm going to try and explain this to the best of my ability, and I'm not going to make any promises. Basically, because Seth is gone, Seth was a striker, so they need to rotate someone else onto offense. Because they need to have someone else rotated onto offense, they're going to be down one defensive player, and Allison tends to play defense. So to make up for the loss of their defensive player, Wymack decides that Andrew is going to be on goal for the entire game. Renee is going to switch off with Allison and sub in and out for her, and Renee is going to play defense sometimes and Allison is going to play defense sometimes. That's really the best explanation that I could give based off of what I understood. And this is not to say that it's written incoherently. It's actually written very well and very clearly. I just already have spatial awareness issues. Like, if you knew the amounts of times that I have turned left when something very clearly told me to turn right, you would be worried for me. So that's basically it. Andrew having to play a whole game on his own means that his medication schedule that they've set is not going to be able to go how it normally is able to go. So usually, if I'm understanding correctly, usually Andrew has this kind of under the table deal. He's required by law to be on this medication, and he usually has this because of his parole basically. And he usually has this under the table deal going that he will skip a dose of his medication so he doesn't have to be out of his mind 24/7 basically, because the medication makes him very euphoric and high, and that's just not pleasant all the time. And so he will skip the dose at the beginning of the game, after the game. At some point, he skips the dose. And then he goes through his withdrawal symptoms during the second half of the game. And on that second half, Renee will usually sub in for him as the goalie. Because Andrew's going to have to be on this whole time by himself, he can't do that, or he's going to have to make some sort of adjustment to the schedule. Wymack is not supposed to know about this arrangement, legally, because again, Andrew has to be on his medication per law, and basically the state said, we are going to release him into your custody, Wymack, if you agree to maintain his medication schedule. So Wymack is doesn't know about this, but it's kind of under the table. So Wymack says, whatever you have to do to get through the game, do it. I have a bottle for you in Abby's medicine bag whenever the game is over, because the withdrawal symptoms are really uncomfortable for Andrew. So he likes to drink after he skipped his dose, but also being on the medication is uncomfortable because it makes him euphoric. Then once the medication is out of his system, he is depressive. I don't super get it, and I'm trying the mechanics of it. I think I'm stuck because I have family members who have had to be on psychiatric medication and lithium for bipolar, and it doesn't behave anything like this. So I don't know what to do with this, basically. And then that makes it hard for me to explain it to you. So Andrew basically agrees to this without a fight, and Kevin is annoyed because Kevin is I've been asking you to play unmedicated for 3 months and you keep refusing me. Why did you say yes to Wymack? And Andrew is because telling you no is funny. But Neil is that's kind of not it, is it? So Neil is trying to get an answer from Wymack, and this is when we realize that when Andrew is sober, when he's not on his meds at all, he's mostly apathetic about Exy, which is frustrating for both Kevin and Neil because they live, breathe, sleep, and shit Exy, and they love it so much. And the idea that someone could be as good as Andrew is. Like, Andrew is one of the top goalies in the league, even though this is the worst, or has historically been the worst team in the league, and he just doesn't care. Like, when he's off his meds, he just doesn't care. When he's on his meds, he does it because it's something to do. But like, his apathy towards the game is just like generally very frustrating for people who love Exy for Exy's sake, like Kevin and Neil. So they get on the team bus, they go to Belmont University, which is where their second game of the season is taking place. Andrew fiddles with his medication in whatever way he needs to fiddle with it. Again, I don't fully understand it, but he's going to be in the goal for the whole game, basically. And the point is that he's probably going to get very sick by the second half, like right around the time the second half starts. And so that's kind of the tension point, is like, is he going to be able to keep it together for the second half of this game? And this is like excellent writing. Like, Nora Sakavic is amazing at writing these game sequences, again, to a game that doesn't exist. But it's just like, she's really great at building up this tension. So because they don't have really any like alternates for someone to like sit on the sidelines for a whole half of a game or rest, or if someone gets injured, they all have to like rotate on and off the court throughout the game. So Kevin has given Neil very clear instructions. He says, pace yourself for the first half and don't even think about trying to score. And then he's like, you can go balls to the wall the second half of the first period, quarter, half, I don't know. You can go balls to the wall later, but for the beginning, really, really pace yourself. So Neil is like frustrated because he can't make any attempts on the goal, and the other team is confused because they're like, why are they not trying to score? And basically they're like conserving energy by throwing the ball back to Andrew and having him like do the serve instead of serving it forward, because serving it forward is kind of what the other team expects, and so they're going to be on them immediately. But if they throw it back to Andrew, they have a little bit of time to like regroup and pace themselves. So Neil gets injured during the first half of the game. One of the other team's players almost dislocates his shoulder, and this is one of the moments where he goes back into the locker room and he's like, I'm fine, and everyone is like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, they're like, shut up, no you're not, just take a break. So he's able to rest during the second half, during the first part of the second half of the game, and then he goes back on. At this point, they're like up 1, and if Belmont, which is the school that they're playing against, makes another goal, they would be tied, and then they would have to go into an extra 15-minute like overtime period, and they're all exhausted. This is like 90 minutes straight of running with like maybe a 15-minute break here and there. So they're exhausted, and Andrew makes an amazing save in the last few seconds of the game. He like literally throws himself on the ground in between the ball and the net, and he saves them from having to go into overtime. The only sad part is that he almost throws up from his withdrawal symptoms. Like, he can barely handle himself. But then this is when one of the next like sweet moments of the book comes. Wymack usually has about like 2 players go out with him to talk to the press. Allison was off during the like end of the second half, so she has already showered and changed, and Dan and Renee volunteer to help Wymack with the press so that Neil can go into the girls' change room at Belmont and use the showers in peace, because the showers don't have any stalls and he doesn't like to be naked around any of the other guys. And he is absolutely gobsmacked that they have noticed that he doesn't like to be naked around the other guys, that they have volunteered to delay their showers in order to give him the entire girls' shower to himself. He's like, oh my God, they noticed something about me? They care about me? When Neil is out of the shower, he goes to see Wymack, and Andrew is in there chugging a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. He's just taking it to the face. They're just blah, 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 blah. Like, it's bad. And then when they get on the bus to go back to Palmetto, Neil is like, he's sitting on the bus and he's like, what is this feeling so sudden and new? And it's happiness. He's happy for the first time maybe that he can ever remember, and he doesn't like it. He's like, this is so nasty. What is this? I don't like. He's like feeling loved and cared for and validated for the first time in his life. And he's like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm scared. It's really funny. So the team forces Neil to go shopping for clothes, because the only clothes that he has are a ratty pair of jeans that are so threadbare that they've turned from blue to gray, and a couple of nasty t-shirts. And the fall banquet for the Southeast District of like the Exy division is coming up soon. So he's going to need like nice clothes to wear to the fall banquet anyway. And because it's the fall banquet for the Southeast division and the Ravens have just moved to the Southeast division, the Ravens are going to be there. They surely will. So it'll be the first time that Neil has seen Rico, and also the first time that Kevin has seen Rico since the Kathy show in August. And remember, Neil wants to stay away from Rico because he doesn't want to be recognized. Kevin wants to stay away from Rico because Rico is literally his schmabuser. On this shopping trip, Nikki starts making jokes about Neil being gay. He's like, you're 19 and you've never looked at Allison's tits. Like, I know that you're gay. And Neil is like, because he's like, I'm not really anything. He's never really had the opportunity to form a idea of what he is attracted to simply because of spending most of his adolescence on the run and being punished by his mother every time he started to form any kind of feeling for anyone. So they're like shopping for him and he's trying to pay. Like, he has $250,000 in cash on his person, like in his little go book. And then he has the directions to $500,000 in cash in his go book. So he's like, it's okay, I have money, like I can pay. But they force him to get the clothes on the school's dime. And they also force him to get a cell phone. This is a flip phone because remember, it's 2006. So in this moment, like when Nikki is making these jokes about Neil being gay, it's because Nikki starts making jokes about Neil being gay because they're talking about dates for the fall banquet. And Aaron gives them a list of single vixens. Vixens are the Fox's cheerleading team, like the Exy team's cheerleading team. He gives them a list of single vixens that they could potentially take to the fall banquet. And Nikki says, they're all women. Nikki said, that doesn't help us. Nikki, Neil started. Nikki plucked the list out from Neil's fingers and crumpled it. Your ignorance is endearing, Neil. You're 19 and you've never looked at Allison's tits. There's no way you're straight. You and I really need to sit down and talk about this sometime. You know what? I'm done here. Aaron put his hands up and turned away. I'll be in the food court when you guys are finished. Stop being a bad influence, Kevin told Nikki. I am going to make him court. It'll be easier if he remains heterosexual. You know more than any of us how prejudiced people can be. Imagine the impact it would have on his career. We aren't really having this conversation, Neil said. Nikki clapped his hands to either side of Neil's head as if trying to shield Neil from the argument. It didn't really work as he missed Neil's ears completely. You worry about Neil's career, I'll worry about his personal happiness. Come on, Kevin. Even you have to admit this is really weird. Andrew threw up his hands. Newsflash, Nikki. Neil isn't normal. This is beyond abnormal. I'm standing right here, Neil said, and I can hear you. So they're having this like whole discussion about his sexuality, and Neil kind of is like, I don't really have one. Like, he just like isn't engaging with them. After this is when they force him to get a phone. It's a flip phone because remember, this is 2006. And Neil does not want to take the phone because having a phone in his hand reminds him of losing his mom. The last thing that he did before or after he burned up the car with his mom's body in it was throw their burner phones into the ocean because I think the burner phone was like part of how his dad found them. And he also mentions that like he's used to phones only being a way for the people who are looking for him, who he doesn't want to find him, to call him and demand their money back. Andrew is like, okay, I'm going to see what I can do with this. Andrew beckoned Neil closer as if he wanted to show Neil something on his phone's small screen. He flipped the phone open one-handed and pressed down hard on a single button. There was silence, and then the distant hum of Andrew's phone dialing out. Between them, Neil's phone started to sing. The words were different than Andrew's ringtone, but the voice was the same. Neil knew it was from the same miserable song. The lyrics hurt just as much as Andrew's had. Neil stared down at the phone and let it ring. Your phone is ringing, Andrew said. You should answer it. Neil picked it up with numb fingers and opened it. He spared only a second to look at Andrew's name on the screen before he answered and put it to his ear. Your parents are dead. You are not fine, and nothing is going to be okay, Andrew said. This is not news to you. But from now on until May, you are still Neil Josten, and I am still the man who said he would keep you alive. I don't care if you use this phone tomorrow. I don't care if you ever use it again. But you are going to keep it on you because one day you might need it. Andrew put a finger to the underside of Neil's chin and forced Neil's head up until they were looking at each other. On that day, you are not going to run. On that day, you're not going to run. You're not going to think On that day, you're not going to run. You're not going to think about what I promised you. You're going to make the call. Tell me you understand. Neil's voice had left him, but he managed to nod. So Andrew is like, Neil, you're going to take this fucking phone because we need to be able to have access to you. We need to, like, if you remember during the last book, when the monsters all kidnapped Neil and took him to Columbia, he hitchhiked back to Palmetto and called Matt on a payphone and said, I'm going to figure out a way to get back to campus. They're like, we need to be able to get in contact with you. So Andrew's like, you're going to take this damn phone. Neil's voice had left him, but he managed to nod. Andrew let go and snapped his phone shut. Neil closed his own with a quiet click. After looking down at it for another endless minute, he leaned over and put it in his messenger bag. Andrew watched with hooded eyes until Neil sat upright. If you're done having issues, take your turn. Kevin is probably fuming, waiting on you. Neil wanted to ask about Kevin. Neil meant to ask about Kevin, but the phones reminded him of another problem. He could bother Kevin for a better explanation of his deal with Andrew. If you're done having issues, take your turn. Kevin is probably fuming, waiting on you. Excuse me. Neil meant to ask about Kevin, but the phones reminded him of another problem. He could bother Kevin for a better explanation of his deal with Andrew. This question was something only Andrew could answer. Why did the Oakland police call you? Right for the throat. Maybe not so spineless after all, Andrew said, amused. Children's Services is opening an investigation into one of my foster fathers. Pig Higgins knew I lived with them, so he called me looking for testimony. But you won't help him. Andrew flicked his fingers in dismissal. Richard Spear is an uninteresting but relatively harmless human being. They won't find anything to pin on him. You sure? Your reaction was a little extreme for a misunderstanding. I don't like that word. Neil hesitated. Extreme? Misunderstanding. It's an odd word to have a grudge against. You don't have any room to judge other people's problems, Andrew said. Andrew swung his leg over the bench and got to his feet. Neil guessed that meant the conversation was over. He reached for his workout shorts as Andrew left. The door had barely closed behind Andrew before it was pushed open again. Andrew was right. Kevin looked thoroughly annoyed he'd had to delay practice for them. So he takes the phone and realizes, so he has this little exchange with Andrew. He's trying to figure out why the Oakland PD is still so interested in Andrew, interested in what Andrew's got going on. And this is when we learn about the investigation into Andrew's former foster father. Now that he has the phone in his possession, Neil looks through it and he realizes that Andrew has programmed the speed dial so that it is 1 Andrew, 2 Kevin, and 3 Wymack. Betsy Dobson, she is listed as the emergency contact, but Neil is like, why the fuck is she in here? And he deletes that. Andrew has also given Nikki Neil's phone number. So the next morning after this shopping trip, Neil receives a smiley face text from Nikki. The Foxes keep texting him throughout the day, and he's like, I don't even know what the fuck my number is. Like, how have they gotten my number, and why do they keep texting me? He's so annoyed by the end of the day. He's like, I cannot imagine what these people talk to each other about in person if this is what they do all day, texting. And you'd be surprised. 20 years almost from when this book is set, and you would be surprised how much I can text someone and then also talk to them on the phone. And the texts initially are triggering for him because he's used to his phone only going off when it's bad news. So when Nikki texts him the first time, he's like, why would Nikki have bad news for me? And he like doesn't know what to do. And then he opens the phone and it's just like a stupid question. And Nikki is like, he's like, okay. Like, and so like slowly throughout the day, he's kind of getting like desensitized to the trigger of the phone being a signal of bad news. And then by the end of the day, he realizes that the reason that Nikki and the rest of the team kept texting him was in part because Andrew gave Nikki the job of desensitizing Neil to the phone. He noticed how Neil was reacting when Nikki tried to give it to him initially. So he was like, Nikki, find a way to make him want to have the phone because he needs to have it, basically. Notice again how much they notice about Neil's neuroses and his problems, and how much they make it an effort to take care of him. So by the end of this chapter, Neil is thinking to himself, well, Kevin has something Andrew wants. They have an agreement between them for some reason. Kevin must have something that Andrew wants. So what is it? And why is Andrew going along with it? Why does Andrew want it? And why is Kevin going along with Andrew's like insane drug-addled demands and defiances? So they play their game against USC Columbia. I think they win that game. I don't exactly remember. But after that game, the next week is the fall banquet for the Southeast XC Division. Blackwell University is the host for this year's fall banquet. It's within driving distance, so the Foxes decide that they're not going to stay for the 2 days of banquet festivities. It's normally a night where there's like a dance type situation, you know, when you would have like prom in the 2000s and you'd have like a full dinner and whatnot. Yeah, it's like that for the first night. And then the second day is like meet and greet, like getting to know, schmoozing basically amongst all of the teams in the district. The Foxes don't want to stay because they normally get like mugged off by all of the teams in their district and treated really horribly by them. So they're like, we're going to show face at the banquet. We're going to stay for the night and then we're going to drive home because it's close enough to drive. And this is when we find out about Aaron's little girly friend, Caitlin. Aaron is bringing Caitlin, who is one of the Vixens, again, the Foxes cheerleaders, and he is very cagey about his relationship with Caitlin. We can assume that when he walked off earlier, like when Andrew and Renee went to go spar and Aaron walked off, he probably walked off to go find Caitlin, right? And Andrew is very annoyed that Caitlin is there. Caitlin could die for all Andrew cares. Like, he hates her. He does not speak to her. He does not look at her. He's clearly peeved. And Neil is like, well, what's going on there? Kevin is also super freaked out about seeing Rico and Tetsuji again, and the entire Ravens team, basically, because the way that they see it, Kevin abandoned them. Like, they invested in him. He was supposed to bring them X amount of earnings through his career at court. Why am I speaking when I don't have the camera in my hand? Do we know if NYX has discontinued this is juice gloss? Because I'm basically out of it, and it's like literally the juiciest lip gloss that I have in my collection. I'm trying to get that 2006 shine. This is when we learn that Kevin calls Tetsuji the master. That was a little bit of uncomfortable information for me to learn. I said the master, not the Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I want to be in any Paul Thomas Anderson movie. It'd be Inherent Vice. Maybe the milkshake one. What's that one? Wymack gives Kevin an entire bottle of vodka to drink so that he can calm down. This man will not stop supplying these underage people with alcohol. And honestly, they've been through worse. So at least he's not giving them crack. You know what I mean? Wymack also makes Neil promise to behave himself. And I want you to type in the comments right now how long you think that Neil is going to give this promise. How long do you think Neil is going to keep this promise that he makes to Wymack to behave himself? Wymack says you better behave yourself. Neil says yes, coach. How long in hours at this banquet do you think it's going to take? And or minutes, maybe even seconds. Because when the Foxes get into the banquet hall, they are seated at the same table as the Ravens. I don't know how big Miss Sakavic anticipated that these tables would be, but a table that is a circular table that is large enough to fit 31 people is insane. What would the diameter of that have to be? What would the circumference of that have to be? How big is this gym? The Ravens are seated in this freakish symmetrical pattern. They're all wearing the exact same outfits. The two girls are wearing the same outfits, and all the men are wearing the exact same suit. And this is when we meet baby girl, aka Jean. Okay, when we meet Jean, this is not like a baby girl moment, but as soon as I met him, because I'm une petite francophile, I kind of stand. I said, not this French fuck. Oh my gosh, who is this? Jean Moreau. I'm so intrigued. Jean threatens Neil by basically calling out 3 of Neil's past names. So they're sitting at this table, and Jean says, Jean couldn't hide all of a flinch, and the smooth look on his face gave way to an irritated scowl. Andrew only smiled wider at the sight of it. Andrew's like crushing Jean's hand in a handshake right now. I'm Andrew. We haven't met yet. For which I am grateful, Jean said. The Foxes are they all an embarrassment to Class 1 XC, but your very existence is unforgivable. A goalkeeper who doesn't care if he is scored on has no right to touch a racket. You should have stayed on the sidelines. Like the publicity stunt you are. That's a bit out of line, don't you think? Renee said. The woman now on Rico's right gave a loud snort. Someone like that replaced you in goal. You must be downright terrible. I can't wait to watch one of your matches. I think it'll be interesting. We would make a drinking game of it, but we don't want to die of alcohol poisoning. Yeah, that'd be a shame, Dan said with heavy sarcasm. This is the first time our teams have met, Renee said, sounding completely unruffled by the rude word. Do we have to start off so poorly? Why not? You're terrible at everything else you do. Why not? You're poor at everything else you do, the woman said. Is it honestly fun to be so terrible? I imagine we have more fun than you do, yeah, Renee said. Neil could hear the smile in her voice. He didn't know how she could keep up such a nice tone. His fear was an icy ball in the pit of his stomach, but listening to the Raven's derision was eating a hole through it. Keeping his mouth shut and staying out of the conversation was taking more willpower than he thought he had. So, okay, like I said just before this, Jean has threatened Neil by saying to him basically, what was your name again? Alex, Stefan, Chris? And those are Neil's 3 most recent aliases that he went by. So he's like, fuck. Now he knows that Jean, Rico, and by extension, the Moriyamas know who he is. Jean responds to Renee when she's like, yeah, I imagine we have more fun than you do. And he says, funny sur children, Jean said, looking away from Andrew. If he'd been going to say anything else, he forgot it when he got a good look at Renee. Andrew let go of Jean's hand while he was distracted, but it took Jean another moment to withdraw it. Rico barely moved, but Neil was so attuned to his presence he didn't miss it. Neither did Jean, judging by how fast he found his tongue again. At this level, it is supposed to be about skill, but your team is sadly lacking. You have no right to play with us. Then you shouldn't have transferred districts, Matt said. No one wants you here. You took something that doesn't belong to you, a Raven said. You brought this year's humiliation on yourselves. We didn't take anything, Dan said. Kevin wants to be here. The Raven across from Renee laughed. Don't tell me you actually believe that Kevin went to you because someone had to teach you what XC is supposed to look like on a court. If he had stayed on as an assistant coach, maybe he would learn to stomach your failures. Now that he's playing with you, there's no way he will last the season. We know Kevin better than you ever will. We know how much your incompetence must grate on him. So do we, Aaron said. It's not like he's shy with his opinion. Aaron's kind of funny. Even though Aaron is homophobic and freaky and like depressed, I find him to be quite funny. So once again, Neil is a fucking dummy because this whole time the Ravens are like pecking at him and because they're birds. They're pecking at him and pecking at him and pecking at him and like trying to get him to react because they know that he has an explosive anger. And at some point he's like, he wished he had inherited his mother's patience instead of his father's anger. The Ravens are like antagonizing them in part by calling Andrew the team's pet and they call him Doe. And Neil is like, what the fuck? Neil is successfully keeping his mouth shut though until Rico calls Neil's mom, Mary, a coward. Nicky dug his fingers into Neil's thigh under the table, a silent, desperate reminder to keep his mouth shut. Neil left half-moon marks on the back of Nicky's hand with his fingernails and counted to 10. He only made it to 4 before Rico opened his mouth again. What a coward, Rico said with exaggerated disappointment. Just like his mother. Neil stopped counting. You know, I get it. Being raised as a superstar must be really, really difficult for you. Always a commodity, never a human being, not a single person in your family thinking you're worth a damn off the court. Yeah, sounds rough. Kevin and I talk about your intricate and endless daddy issues all the time. Neil, Kevin said low and frantic. Neil ignored him. I know it's not entirely your fault that you are mentally unbalanced and infected with these delusions of grandeur, and I know you're physically incapable of holding a decent conversation with anyone like every other normal human being can, but I don't think any of us should have to put up with this much of your bullshit. Pity only gets you so many concessions, and you used yours up 6 insults ago. So please, just shut the up and leave us alone. Jaws dropped down the line. Raven's symmetry shattered as they stared at Neil stupefied in disbelief. Okay, do I think Neil is a big dumb idiot? Yes. I am a Taurus. Neil canonically is an Aquarius, but I don't think that really fits. His Neil Josten birthday is Aries season, and I think that fits a little bit more. because I have Mercury in Aries. I'm talking about astrology. I'm so sorry if you hate astrology. Without fail, there's always someone who comments on my videos like, oh, rocks and stars don't name all of my... Okay, go find someone who believes that. Why are you telling me? Clearly that I don't care. It's very obvious that I don't care. I get him. Sometimes you gotta tell a sociopathic twink to shut the fuck up. And that is my lesson for today. The more you know. But the thing with Neil is that he always takes it too far. Like, he will personally insult Rico in a way that Rico will just like not forget, you know? And then on top of that, by this point, he knows that Rico and John have something on him. He has the least information in this situation, right? Because he knows everything, but he doesn't know how much they know. And so him instigating them is a really bad idea, but he has to do it because he has a temper. And honestly, that's my sister. Everyone's upset. And he says he looked on the table at Dan, who sat with her face buried in her hands. Dan, I said, please. I tried to be nice. Matt, Dan said, almost choking on his name. Matt, coach. Get coach. Oh my God. Matt left as fast as he could. You can't say things like that, John said. Neil wouldn't have looked at him, except John sounded more horrified than angry. And he shouldn't have asked me to join the conversation. I was happy sitting here saying nothing. John turned on Kevin and spoke in quick, furious French. What the hell is this? His antagonism is a personality flaw we're learning to live with, Kevin said. Live with, Jean echoed. Like the very idea offended him. No, you should have dealt with him 2 weeks ago when he first stepped out of line. We trusted you to discipline him. Why doesn't he know his place yet? Neil has no place in Rico's games, Kevin said. He is a fox. He is not a fox. Funny, Neil said in French. John wasn't expecting him to understand them and shot Neil a startled look. Pretty sure the contract I signed said Palmetto State University. A contract does not change facts, Jean said. Did you forget who bought you? Bought me, Neil repeated. Nobody bought me. Kevin frowned, lost. Jean, what are you talking about? So this is when we all learn the truth. Okay, so Jean is talking to Kevin and Neil because he's like, we all know what's going on, right? Like, he's like, we all know what's happening. Remember, Neil remembers his trial with the Moriyamas. He remembers Kevin. He remembers Rico. Kevin does not recognize Neil because Neil has brown hair and brown eyes, and Nathaniel had red hair and blue eyes. Rico has done all of this research into Neil, so Rico now knows that Neil is Nathaniel, and Nathaniel is the kid who did the tryout with Rico and the Moriyamas years ago. So Jean is talking to Kevin, and he's like, and then Jean realizes, Jean looked like he swallowed a stone. You don't know. It was supposed to be an accusation, but it fell flat. Jean shot an incredulous look between them. How can you not know? Why else would you have recruited him, Kevin? His potential, Kevin said. Jean's laughter sounded more than a little hysterical. God save you both, you useless fools. No one else can. How either of you have lived this long when you're so miserably stupid is beyond my capacity to understand. Why, Mac's voice nearly startled Neil out of his skin. What the hell is going on over here? So this is when Jean is realizing, oh, Kevin don't know what's going on. And Kevin is like, what the hell is Jean talking about? And Neil is realizing that Jean has just given up Neil's cover. So Neil says, and so the Foxes go and sit at a table with the coaches, and the Ravens get a different set of people to come sit at their table. But Jean is like, God, Kevin is a fucking idiot. Because honestly, hair dye and contacts don't change a face. Me personally, I remember people's faces really well. I remember I was in college and I was in this writing program, and I saw this girl in the program. We had this retreat in the program, and I saw this girl and I was like, she looks familiar. Why does she look so familiar? And she started talking. She was talking about her life, and I was like, I feel like I've heard this before. She was talking about how her sister was a lot older than her, and her sister had kids who were kind of her age, and her parents were really old. And I was talking to her and I was like, did you go to this elementary school? And she was like, no. I was like, did you go to this middle school? And she was like, no. And I was like, wait, did you go to this elementary school? Because I went to 2 elementary schools. And she was like, yeah, I did. And I was like, I know you. We were in the same 4th grade class. I'm very good at recognizing people's faces. So the idea that he would have spent any amount of time around Neil without recognizing him. And I can't understand that. That's very confusing to me personally. But most people don't have a good recall for faces, and I recognize that. Kevin is working at a deficit too, because the only thing that he actually thinks about is Exie. He doesn't think about people. So, of course, he couldn't put two and two together of who Neil was and how he knew him. Before they move tables, Jean calls Neil over and he says to Neil basically, Rico wants to talk to you later. He says, Rico will have a few minutes of your time later, Jean said. I suggest you speak with him if you do not want everyone knowing you are the butcher's son. Hearing his father's name aloud was a kick in the chest. The noise Kevin made at his side was worse. Neil reacted without thinking, clapping a hand to Kevin's chest and shoving him as far back from the table as he could. Kevin stumbled back so fast he almost fell. Neil didn't look back at him, but he couldn't tune out Kevin's horse denial. That's not true. Shut up, Neil said, but he didn't know which one of them he was speaking to. Don't say anything else. Prenez long, Jean said. It's what you're best at, isn't it? Kevin has finally realized. I think I know this kid from somewhere. He had to literally be told that Neil was the butcher's son to finally put two and two together. But now he's like, wait, it's you. You're bald and you're torturing people with hair. Sorry, that's a TikTok sound. Neil is freaking out. Like, his mind is absolutely spiraling because this is the thing that he was afraid of. If only someone had told him not to become the star of a Division I, highly televised NCAA sport that is, in this universe, the most popular streamed sport on television. If only he had been warned by, say, someone who shares his mRNA and DNA and who for 5 years groomed him to keep out of the spotlight? I don't know. Just a weird suggestion. They get to their new table and Dan is talking to Neil. She says, Neil, Dan said, taking Kevin's seat between him and Andrew, are you okay? Because Kevin has gone up and ran away because of the confrontation with the Ravens, and Wymack is plying him with more alcohol. You know, it would be bad if Wymack wasn't such a good guy. I remember reading this the first time and waiting for the other shoe to drop, but no, he's just he is really a good guy. He just gives them alcohol because they need it to cope. Does he look okay? Does he look okay to you? Andrew asked. Dan shot Andrew a livid look, but his smile said he wasn't impressed by her anger. Andrew had held the table's edge and leaned back until his chair was balancing on its back legs. It gave him an unobstructed view of Neil behind Dan. Neil looked at him because he didn't trust himself to face anyone else just yet. Andrew shielded his mouth with his hand, but didn't bother to lower his voice. I told you so. Sit down, Minyard, Wymack snapped, coming back up behind Dan's new chair. Andrew gave an exaggerated sigh, but he let his chair fall back to the ground. Wymack turned to Neil next. Did you or did you not tell me you weren't going to start a fight? So, if you wrote your yes in the comments down below, I would venture and say this is maybe 7 minutes after everyone has sat down at the table. The Ravens sit down and they're talking snack for max 7 minutes. And then Neil goes off and insults Rico and is basically. So, I wish I could give you a prize, but I can't. Nikki spoke up on Neil's other side. In Neil's defense, I didn't ask you, Wymack interrupted. Neil, talk to me. In his head, Neil was already counting steps to freedom. Their new seating arrangement made them the closest table to the court door. He'd just have to cross the inner court and get through the locker room. The fence around the stadium was ringed with barbed wire to prevent vandalism and theft, but he could leave the way that they'd come. It was a toss-up as to whether or not the guards would stop him. A young man in nice clothes running breakneck speed away from a public event was suspicious. If he had an excuse to get out of there, like following Kevin to the vodka on the bus, he could conserve his energy until he passed the guards. From there, he just had to find a taxi, because hitchhiking wasn't going to be fast enough this time. He needed to get back to Palmetto State and get his papers from his safe. He needed his money and his numbers. Maybe it was finally time to call. Neil's escape route ground to a sickening halt in his head. He pried his fingers apart and pressed one hand to his pocket. He could feel the hard lines of his phone through the cotton. the word call triggers him and remembers what Andrew said to him when he was like, there's going to be a moment where you're not going to think about the promise I made you and you're just going to have to make a call. And he's like, wait, let me stop thinking about escape routes for just 1 second. Neil, if you can't be here, say so, Wymack said. Abby can take you elsewhere until it's time to leave. Get out of here and get some fresh air. It was a perfect opening, but Neil couldn't take it. If he did, he really would go. He wouldn't come back. Running wasn't easy, but it was easier than trusting Andrew. But Neil remembered the weight of the key in his palm, its metal soaked through with another person's body heat. He remembered Andrew's promise to see this year through with him. No, Neil said, finally finding his voice. I knew this was going to happen. I just wasn't ready for it. It's fine. What can I do? Wymack asked. Neil looked up. The tired look on Wymack's face said Neil's surprise was a little too blatant. For a split second, Neil felt guilty, though he wasn't entirely sure why. He crushed it as fast as he could. He had too much else to worry about right now, and was feeling too much already to deal with this strange thing like guilt. I don't know, Neil said. So Neil says to himself, instead of running away like I normally do, what if I just sat here and trusted the promise that Andrew made me last year that he would protect me and saw how things would unfold? There's nothing much to do because the Foxes are no longer at the same table as the Ravens. So now that their confrontation with the Ravens is over, they decide that they're going to decompress. Dan, Matt, Renee, and Allison, I think, play volleyball. Nikki goes out onto the dance floor with his date, and Aaron goes out onto the dance floor with his date, which leaves Kevin, Neil, and Andrew to do the diplomatic thing and go around the room to each of the teams and introduce themselves. This takes about 2 hours, and then after 2 hours, Neil looks up and he notices Allison just staring off into space, and he's like, what is she looking at? He looks over at her and he sees the Ravens coming towards them in a flying V formation. They're not flying, obviously, they're walking, but you know how birds fly in that V. They're walking towards them like that, and Rico is at the apex of the V. So Neil, Kevin, and Andrew are just standing in one place. The Ravens are approaching them, and then they come to Rico stops where Neil, Kevin, and Andrew are, and then the rest of the Ravens flank them in the V, if that makes sense, and basically surround them. So Allison has rung the alarm, and she's gotten the other upperclassmen, and they slowly start filling in, basically, because they're you're not going to intimidate us. But the Ravens aren't just there to intimidate the Foxes. They're also there to distract them so that Rico and John can pull Neil for their chat. Oh, this is also because the Ravens are kind of antagonizing and intimidating them. This is when Neil figures out finally what Dan's overnight job that she's mentioned before was. Okay, they're talking and they say, Neil Josten, someone said. Neil trusted Kevin to Renee and turned to face the man who'd spoken. 2 men and a woman stood in a tight clump to his left. The man offered a sneer instead of a hand. We're the Ravens' starting strikers. We wanted you to see us so you know what an offense team really looks like. Offense or offensive? Matt sidled up alongside Neil. Renee's arrival might have been a coincidence, but Matt's wasn't. Neil guessed Allison alerted the upperclassmen to the Ravens' approach. Matt Boyd, starting backliner for the Foxes. I'm the one who's going to be wrecking your goals this October. Nice to meet you. He held out his hand but didn't look surprised when no one took it. Guess the pleasure's all mine. We're sure it is, the Raven striker said, seeing how you're dating a prostitute. Stripper, Dan corrected as she showed up and wound her arm around Matt's waist. Her stilettos hung off her fingers by thin straps as she jiggled them as she spoke. Hopefully you're smart enough to distinguish between the two professions. If you're not, I have serious concerns about your academic standings. Neil tried not to stare at her. He would have dismissed the Raven's insult as an outright lie if not for Dan's easy response. Too late, he remembered her telling him she'd worked an overnight job during high school to make ends meet. He'd assumed she was a night stalker at a grocery store, a front desk clerk at a motel. She didn't seem the type of person who'd tolerate being objectified. Neil didn't make a habit of prying into people's pasts, but there had to be an interesting story there. Hennessy, right? One of the strikers said, such a good name for a fierce spirit, for such a fierce spirit. One of the strikers said, such a good name for such a fierce spirit. We were a little disappointed you didn't sign up as part of the entertainment tonight, the others said. We were looking forward to the show. The once-over he gave her was syrupy slow. Matt gave a violent twitch as he forcibly restrained himself from breaking the man's neck. Neil was amazed by his self-control until he saw Dan's fingers digging into Matt's hip in warning. Dan didn't want anyone fighting her battles for her. She slid around Matt to get into the Raven's personal space. The striker grinned at Matt over her shoulder, then tilted toward and sucked in a deep breath against her neck. Dan brought her stilettos up between his legs in a vicious punch. The Raven recoiled with an inhuman yelp. The teammates on either side of him grimaced and cringed away. They were quick to avert their eyes from their half-crumpled colleague. I just thought that was funny. That's why I wanted to read that. Yeah, Hennessy, Dan said, sounding calmer than Neil thought she should in the face of such treatment. Treat you right if you're willing to pay, and we'll fuck you over the morning after if you're not nice enough to her. Sorry, but this bottle's got a name on it. Hope you feel that one for a while, you low-life asshole. She didn't wait for a response, but turned back and folded herself against Matt's side. Oh. Okay. Amazing. So then this moment is when we meet the master himself, Coach Tetsuji Moriyama. Okay. All right. Kevin Day, a booming voice said, and all the Ravens turned to look. Neil followed their stares to the man now standing at the apex of their triangle. The chill that shivered down his spine made all the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Coach Tetsuji Moriyama was unarguably the most powerful man in Exie, as he should be considering he and Kevin's mother, Kaylee Day, were the two to invent the sport 30 years ago. He handpicked Edgar Allen to be the home of the first NCAA Exie Stadium and had been coaching the Ravens ever since. He was the founder of the Exie Rules and Regulations Committee, a consultant for the International Committee, and owner of 2 professional teams. He was a legend. He was also a demon, Rico's abusive uncle and the younger brother of the Moriyama Yakuza boss. Master, Kevin said, voice catching with fear. It's been a while. Moriyama motioned to the Ravens, and they broke formation at last. They filled in gaps between the foxes, a wall of black suits and cold faces. Neil lost sight of Matt and Dan when the strikers bodily shifted him out of the way. He barely noticed, more intent on watching Moriyama and Kevin. Moriyama held out his hand, and Kevin obediently set his left hand in it. Moriyama lifted it to inspect Kevin's ragged white scars. Butcher, a quiet voice said in French. He looked over her shoulder. Jean had come around the circle at some point and was standing a short space away. He tilted his head in order, and Neil followed his stare to see Rico stepping off the court. Neil didn't look back to see if any of his teammates noticed his exit and kept a casual pace on his way to the door. He stepped to the inner court in time to see Rico disappearing into the home locker room. Neil took a breath to steel his nerves and followed. He gets into the locker room and Rico turns to him and says, Nathaniel, it's been so long. Neil's fear was hot and thick in his chest. He could barely breathe around it. He prayed his expression didn't give him away, even as he knew it was too late. My name is Neil. Do not lie to me again. You will not enjoy the consequences. Rico gave Neil a beat to respond. Imagine my surprise when the results came back. Your fingerprints, he elaborated with a mocking twitch to his smile. Kathy gave me your glass as a souvenir. All it took was a smile and a kiss. It seems she is growing up to be quite the cougar. Neil's stomach knotted up inside of him. He had accepted a cup of water at the start of Kathy Ferdinand. There it is. He had accepted a cup of water at the start of Kathy Ferdinand's talk show and hadn't thought twice about leaving it behind afterward. And this is why he's a big dumb dummy. He'd assumed Kathy's crew would see to it. His mother would beat him half to death if she were alive. All the time and money spent covering their tracks, destroyed by a simple batch of nerves, quite literally. I mean, he's human. He's also like a 17-year-old boy, I think, at this point. Like, he's younger than everyone else on the team, 17, 18 years old. I don't remember how old he is. But, like, yeah, of course he was nervous. Of course. Like, that's why his mom was so scared to leave him on his own, because he's a little boy with hormones rushing through his body and he doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. And so, like, yeah, of course, the cup with his fingerprints was left behind and Rico was able to figure out who he was very, very easily. That's why you shouldn't have played Exie. But he's here now. And there wouldn't be a book if he wasn't. And I love this book. So I'm going to keep going. So through this confrontation is when Neil finally figures out what the real deal is. Rico is talking to him and he says to Neil, "You've stolen something from us and we would like compensation for it." And by us, he means the Moriyamas. And Neil is like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I did not steal anything from you. I know my father did business with you and we took his money, but we didn't steal anything from you." And this is when he finds out that his father, the Butcher of Baltimore, was not the leader of the mob. The Moriyamas, the Yakuza Moriyamas, Tetsuji Moriyama's brother, Kengo, the leader of the Moriyama Yakuza branch, was the person who was in charge of Neil's dad. And this freaks Neil out to no end because Neil knows how brutal his father is. He knows how violent his father is. And he's like, the Moriyamas were able to keep my dad in check. I was supposed to be afraid of them this entire time. I stole money from them this entire time. So kind of like in a backwards way, he ended up telling Andrew the truth. Like in the first book, his explanation to Andrew is that his parents worked with the Moriyamas and his dad was skimming money off the top of the books and they assassinated his parents because of that theft. So Neil went on the run. He kind of, in a backwards way, ended up telling the truth because his parents were working for the Moriyamas, or at least his dad was. And his mom, in taking the money that she took when they ran off together, stole money from the Moriyamas. And that was part of why his dad was so dogged in his pursuit of them. It wasn't just because they had embarrassed him, but it was also because they had stolen from the Moriyamas. And Neil's dad is not just the Butcher of Baltimore. He's also Kengo's American number 2. He's the guy who was like set up to take the fall in case the Moriyamas like got any heat on them for their business dealings in the US. Like they put Neil's dad in the position to go to prison for them if they ever got in trouble. And he happily accepted that. So kind of like in exchange and as a fealty to the Moriyamas, Neil's dad sold Neil to the Moriyamas. Or I guess at this point he was Nathaniel. He sold Nathaniel to the Moriyamas. And as I mentioned in the first video, but I'll explain again here, the idea was that Neil would prove his worth to Kengo by going through this EXE trial, this 2-day EXE trial. So the first day he was going to practice and run drills with Kevin and Rico, and the second day was going to be the day that would decide whether he was added to the Ravens roster or assassinated by his own father. And he's like 13, 11, maybe, when all of this is happening. I don't exactly remember how old. But his mom did not want to take the chance on him potentially failing that second day and being assassinated. So she kidnapped him, stole the money, and they went on the run. And that's why it was theft from the Moriyamas, not from his dad. Rico's having this conversation with Neil and like explaining all of this to Neil. Neil is absolutely incredulous. And then Matt busts into the locker room and he like breaks up whatever's going on between Rico, Jean, and Neil. When Neil gets back to the Foxes, like when Matt brings him back to the Foxes, Andrew is like, "Where the fuck did you go? Like, I told you that I would protect you. What happened?" And then Neil pulls his phone out of his breast pocket, or his, I don't remember where it was. He pulls his phone out and he's like, "I decided to make a different call this time." And so he apparently programmed Matt into his phone's speed dial and called Matt secretly in his pocket to let Matt know where he was so Matt could come and break up the party that was going on between him, John, and Rico. So that is a symbol of Neil slowly learning to trust the Foxes. Ooh. Okay, so of course the Foxes do not end up spending the night for this banquet because it's gone absolutely disastrously for them. And Kevin is still like, "Oh my god, I just saw Tetsuji in the KMS, and also Neil is Nathaniel, and also Rico was in my face. I'm there, and also I've had 2 handles of vodka, 2 shots of vodka." He is tweaking. So they all go back to Palmetto, and Neil spends the night at Wymac's house. Wymac reveals to Neil that they're all noticing that he's an anomaly. But he's not just an anomaly to like Wymack and the rest of the team. He's primarily an anomaly to Andrew. And Andrew had spent the night at Wymack's like earlier in the last book. He was like raving because when Andrew's on his medication, he's manic. So he's just like talking a mile a minute. And that's why he's always smiling, even when there's nothing to smile about. It's because he's manic on his medication. And Andrew was like raving about how Neil doesn't make any sense. He just doesn't make any sense. And he doesn't understand what's going on with him. And Wymack is like, yeah, I still don't think that you don't make any sense. I don't know what's happening with you. I don't remember if this is when Neil tells Wymack his like, that the same story that he gave Andrew about his family being like working with the Moriyamas. But he like Wymack is talking to Neil about his parents, and Neil learns that Wymack's parents both in like when they were younger. I think his dad overdosed or his mom overdosed, and then his dad like died in a prison brawl or something. But like Wymack is an orphan. But Wymack is from DC, which is like kind of around where Neil grew up, and he's excited that they can bond over being DMV babies. So I am one too. Woo! This is also when Neil shares with Wymack Andrew's theory about Seth's passing, that Rico put a hit out on Seth to put pressure on the Foxes and also to punish Neil for mouthing off to him. And Wymack is like, do not blame yourself for what happened to Seth. He was a loose cannon. If he didn't OD this time, he was going to do it eventually. Like, this is not your fault. And Neil has trouble accepting that because like, yeah, it's his fault. Like, I know it's not kosher to like blame people for the actions of other people, but if he had just kept his mouth shut, Allison would still have a boyfriend. Okay. So then Neil finally realizes that he has to face the music and go back to Fox Tower. When he gets back, Kevin confronts him about being Nathaniel. Neil says that he thought Kevin came to get him in Millport in Arizona, where he was living before, because Kevin recognized him and he knew who he was. And once he realized that he didn't, he was like, okay, I can maintain this Neil Josten persona for a little bit longer. And this is when Neil starts asking questions about like the Moriyamas, the structure of their business, whatever. Why did Rico say he bought me? Neil asked. Kevin was silent for so long. Neil almost hoped that this was all a sick dream, but finally Kevin spoke. You're not really him, Kevin said. Tell me you aren't really Nathaniel. Don't call me that. Doesn't matter who I used to be. I'm Neil now. It's not that simple, Kevin said, louder and dismayed. And Neil shook his head. I didn't know when I came here that the Moriyamas and my father were business partners. They were not partners. Kevin sounded almost as offended as Rico had. I didn't know, Neil repeated. Until Coach told me about the Moriyamas this May, I knew nothing about Rico's family. After that, I thought maybe that's why we met so long ago. I thought Rico's father and mine were discussing territories and borders, but last night Rico said my father belongs to the Moriyamas. What did he mean by that? Why did he say he bought me? Don't lie to me, Kevin said. We're in enough trouble as it is. My mother didn't tell me why we were running, Neil said. I never asked her why she finally had enough. I was just glad to get away. We never talked about anything real after that. It was always about the weather or the current language or the local culture. Next time she had anything meaningful to say to me was when she was dying. Even then, she didn't talk about my father. Not once did she mention the Moriyamas. If she had, I wouldn't be here now, would I? So tell me the truth. Your father was Lord Kengo's right-hand man, the most trusted weapon in Lord Kengo's arsenal. The territory he held for the Moriyamas. He was the force that kept the empire in line, and the name that would take the fall if the government ever caught on. His power made you a loose end. You could never inherit his syndicate, Kevin said. Lord Kengo handpicks his people very carefully to bolster his throne. Nepotism fractures that upward mobility, and leads families to think of their own success first. He could have killed you to keep things simple, but he gave you a chance to earn your keep. Your mother enrolled you in little leagues so you could learn Xe. The day you met us was your auction. Wait, Neil said. Wait, what? You were supposed to be like me, Kevin said. You were a gift. Another player for the master to train. You had 2 days to win him over. An initial scrimmage to show with us to show off your potential, and a second scrimmage to prove you could adapt and implement his instructions and criticisms. If afterward he decided you weren't worth his time, you would be executed by your own father. Neil swallowed hard. How did I do? Your mother wouldn't risk failure, Kevin said. You never made it to the second practice. She disappeared with you overnight. The heat in Neil's stomach could have been nausea or rage, but he didn't know who he was angry at. His mother hated his fascination with Exie his entire life. She told him over and over he'd never touch a racket again, but she never told him why. He couldn't understand why she had never explained the totality of what they were running from. I'm gonna be sick, Neil said, getting to his feet. He was halfway up before Kevin grabbed his wrist to stop him. Nathaniel, wait. Neil wrenched free so hard he almost sent Kevin sprawling. Don't call me that. So I can tell this is probably very stressful. Very stressful. If you've spent your entire life on the run, only like putting together the reason why you're on the run from like snatches of what you're able to gather is going on, and then someone comes in and is like, actually no, this is way bigger than anything you ever could have imagined. Like, I can only dream of what that would have been like. Sounds like a nightmare, honestly. So this is like all when he finally realizes why his mother was so disgusted by Exie, why she wanted to keep him away from it while they were on the run. And Kevin also lets Neil know that Tetsuji sees him as a liability. Mary, Neil's mom, was loyal to her family back in the UK, but Neil doesn't really have any loyalty. He doesn't really have any loyalty because he spent like so much time away from his father. So he is an unknown entity, basically. Tetsuji is hoping that the Ravens can scoop up Neil in the springtime and just like enfold him into the Raven roster so that he can become the member of the team that he was always meant to be, and also so that they can ensure his loyalty. But Neil is refusing. He's like, I don't want to become a Raven, because he doesn't want to be pulled back into his father's world. And then Kevin gets like really sad because he thought that like Neil was this fresh slate and this beautiful new opportunity, this like passion project that he could focus on and like cultivate into becoming ready for court. And now he's realizing that Neil is just as tangled up in this Moriyama mess as he was. And so there's like a moment where he whispers to himself, he's like, you were supposed to be court. Like, he's so sad and disappointed. And the other thing is like, they're realizing that the Moriyamas are either going to, if they get a hold of Neil in the spring, they're either going to work him literally to death or execute him if he is like proves to be the loose cannon that he's shown himself to be so far. So Neil is like, what are we gonna do? Like, are you still gonna keep training me? Like, what's happening? And Kevin's like, I mean, yeah, what else can we do? Basically, they're moving forward into the next phase of the season, and Neil is thinking about what they will have to come up against. He was thinking that he would run after the game against the Ravens because that's when Rico would see him. But that's no longer a plan because Rico's already seen him. And then he was like, okay, I'll run during winter break because no one will notice that I'm like packing up and never coming back. But then Rico drops a bomb that he knows who Neil is, that he's actually Nathaniel, and that the Moriyama family technically owns Nathaniel and like all of this stuff. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to give myself this year. I'm going to give myself this year to play this game that I love, take the Foxes as far as I can, and then I will go to the FBI and rat out my father and the Moriyamas. Because whether they like put out a hit on him after he becomes state's evidence or not, he's not going back to his father's world. He's not getting caught back up with this Moriyama business. So he's like, I would rather go out on my own terms and not be like sucked into this Moriyama like Ravens mess. So I'm going to preempt them and go to the FBI at my first convenience whenever the Foxes season is over. So in this process, he starts to think about like who they have to come up against. The top teams in the league are Edgar Allen, of course, they're number 1. And then the number 2 spot usually flicks between Penn State and USC, the USC in California. So they would either have to beat USC or Penn State to get to the final. And his goal is to get to the final and beat the Ravens at the final. So this is when the shift happens for Neil. For the first time in Neil's life, he wasn't thinking about the future. He stopped counting days until the Ravens match and scaled back how much news he watched and read. He threw all of his energy into practices, stayed awake through most of his classes, and juggled his teammates as best as he could. He saw Andrew's lot on the way to and from practices, and he was out with Kevin and Andrew most nights, so he gave his evenings to the upperclassmen. He knew things about them he'd never bothered to learn about anyone else in his entire life. Renee's middle name was Natalie. Her adoptive mother renamed her when she pulled Renee out of the foster system. Her mother was the reason she and Dan were at Palmetto State. Stephanie Walker was a reporter who'd interviewed Wymack with the ulterior motive of marketing Renee to him. Wymack flew to North Dakota during the spring championships to watch Renee's team take on their biggest rivals. Dan happened to be the captain of the rival team, and Wymack was impressed by her fierce performance. He signed them both that weekend. So he's finally locking in with his teammates and like learning things about them, like actual biographical information, getting to know them, chatting with them, spending recreational time with them. Because like if he was unsafe, he knows now that like running is no longer an option. If he was unsafe before on the run on his own, he's basically painting a giant target on his back without any protection. Andrew told him at the end of the last book, and it's become abundantly clear to him now, he's like, you called Rico's attention to you. He knows who you are now. If he doesn't, he's going to figure it out. And how do you think you'll fare alone? Because you're on a team like the Foxes that has the infamy of being the lowest ranked team in the league, we've already lost one player. They can't afford to try and take you out because people will start to get suspicious and be confused. Our notoriety will protect you, so you have to stay here if you want to stay alive. So he's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to commit. If this is the bit, then I'm going to commit to it. He learns that Renee and Dan started out as high school rivals, and when they got to the Foxes, they were still kind of rivals, but they would put on a good face to the rest of the team because the rest of the team was all guys back then and pretend like they were besties. And they roomed together. So at a certain point throughout the year, they realized that like the face that they were putting on was actually real, and they were actually like very good friends, and they just accepted their fate as best friends. He also learns more about Dan's job as a stripper. It was a job that she took because it worked with her schedule with Exie and with school, and she was able to do it because she had a fake ID. She no longer talks to her aunt, but she is still really close to the girls from the club that she danced at. And then the team also learns things about Neil, like the fact that he doesn't like vegetables, but he loves fruit, and the fact that he doesn't like loud noises or music, and the fact that his favorite color is gray, as favorite colors go. Anyway, so he's getting to know the team, and he's at the library when he sees Aaron with his little girly friend Caitlin, and they're standing in line at the library cafe holding hands and canoodling, and Neil is openly staring at them, and then Nikki comes up behind him and he's like, what's so interesting about the cafe? And then he sees Aaron and Caitlin, and he says to Neil, do us all a favor and keep it to yourself. Like, don't tell Andrew that you've seen them together. And Neil is like, what? Like, what's going on? He doesn't really understand what the whole deal between Andrew and Aaron is. So this is his opportunity to figure out more information about them from Nick. Nikki calls Neil family. He says, because you're family. Like, he told the abridged story in front of Dan and Matt, but he says, because you're family, I'll give you the whole story. Because the monsters see Neil as one of them. So the truth of the whole story is that their mom had initially given up both of them. She had put both of them into the foster care system. And then she later went back and got just Aaron. That left Andrew there with no last name, no family, and a grudge against Aaron. That's why the Ravens call Andrew Doe as like a insult, because he was Andrew Doe originally when he was given up. I think they were Aaron and Andrew Doe, and then Aaron was picked up by his mom and Andrew was left there. And Andrew only changed his last name when his mom finally like readopted him 3 years prior. So now they both have the same last name. But this is why, like, Nikki thinks this is why Andrew blew Aaron off initially when Aaron tried to reach out all those years ago, because Andrew is really angry at Aaron and blames Aaron for being the one who was chosen by their mom to be raised in the family and out of the system. Like, after finding Andrew, things got really tumultuous for Tilda and Aaron. Tilda, Aaron's mom, moved him across the country to Colombia. But then she started doing hard drugs and drinking and really harming Aaron. And because all of this was happening at home, Aaron started acting up, taking his mom's drugs, and turned into the lovely ray of sunshine that we meet in this book. He's so pleasant. He's such a pleasant boy. So when Nikki's dad took Aaron to California to meet Andrew at juvie, Andrew kind of all of a sudden turned around. He started behaving really well. He ended up getting parole early, getting released early, and he was like all of a sudden acting like he really had a family to live for when he had never acted like that before. The rift in their relationship came when Aaron's mother died. So, as I said before, Nikki's dad forced Tilda, his sister, to bring Andrew from California to South Carolina to live with his brother and his mom. And Nikki tells Neil that Aaron blames Andrew for their mom's death. And Neil asks him point blank, he's like, well, did he do it? Like, did he her? Like, what's going on? And this is a story as Nikki tells it. Aaron showed up at Nikki's house with fresh bruises on his face. And that's how Nikki's dad found out that his sister was being abusive to Aaron. She was not doing the same to Andrew. And calls his sister over to the house to pick up Aaron and to kind of like try and give her the what for hitting her son. And she just like quickly collects him, goes into the car, and drives off. Well, the car jumped a median while they were driving home, and she never made it home, but Aaron got out of the car crash uninjured. Except it wasn't Aaron who was in the car with Tilda. It was Andrew. Andrew had asked Aaron to sub in for him at a tutoring session at their high school, and Aaron didn't know why. And then when he got home that day, like when they called him and said what had happened to their mom, he realized, oh, Andrew must have planned this whole thing. And Aaron is heartbroken because he never got to make up with his mom. He never got to make amends. She never got to apologize to him. They never got to have the kind of relationship that he always wanted to have with his mom. Blames Andrew for taking that opportunity away from him. And Neil can kind of relate because he feels the same about his mom. He's like, we struggled so much. We were on the run for so long. We never got to have like a normal relationship. And now he doesn't have a mom anymore. Like, his mom is gone. But then Neil finally puts two and two together why Aaron and Andrew are struggling to like be in relationships with each other so much. And that's because like they don't talk. Like, they don't talk to each other at all. Neil is telling this to Nikki. He says, Neil asked, do you remember how Andrew ended up on his medication? Yeah, Nikki said. Then went quiet as he thought about it. Nikki used to work at Eden's Twilight down in Columbia. He was on break one night when 4 men decided they could beat the homosexuality out of him. Andrew stepped in to protect Nikki, but he went too far. It was one thing to join the fight and another thing entirely to keep at it when the men were unconscious and bleeding out on the sidewalk. Andrew would have killed them if the club's bouncers hadn't hauled him away. The press had a field day with it. Neil read all about it when he was researching the Foxes. She was hurting Aaron, so Andrew stopped her. Neil said. Aaron should have been grateful, but he mourned her like he didn't care what she'd done to him. He took sides. You really think so? It makes sense to me, Neil said. It might even explain why Andrew hated Caitlin, though Neil wasn't sure which interpretation to go with. That Andrew wouldn't let another girl come between them, or that he was punishing Aaron for choosing the wrong side 3 years ago. I'm guessing they've never talked about how she died. Not since I moved in, and I showed up the day of Aunt Tilda's funeral. They won't even talk about the little things. I don't see them having a belated heart-to-heart about Andrew's intentions anytime soon. Nikki, this is when we learn that Nikki carries a lot of guilt about not being there for his cousins. And that's why he's like deciding to show up now. It's kind of close to my heart personally because I had a god sister who kind of did the same thing for me, my sister, my niece, my mom. After my dad passed away, she moved from North Carolina to Maryland so she could be closer to us. And so like, she's also like very much like Nikki, very flamboyant, very loud personality, really funny, always wanting to like make everyone in the room super happy. And she passed away 3 years after my dad did on the same day. So let's pour one out for you, Emma. Miss her dearly. The Nikki Hammock of the family. He feels really bad about how he hadn't shown up for his cousins to that. But like, to be fair, Nikki was dealing with a lot. He had come out to his parents as gay, even though he knew that they were like super churchy and not in like a fun, cool, woo-woo Renee way, but like in a freaky, culty MAGA way. And they did not accept him when he came out. It was to the point where they sent him to a conversion camp. And when he came back, he pretended like he had been converted, but he was so miserable that he was contemplating suicide. Okay. Suicide. All right. His German teacher at school noticed how miserable he was. So she told him about an exchange program in Germany that he could do for his senior year of high school. He arranges everything with his family. They send him off to the exchange program. But the exchange program coincided with the time that Aaron was coming to South Carolina to stay in Columbia with his mom. So Nikki is basically like, I didn't even really give a crap that Aaron was there. I was just so excited that I had an out and I could get away from my parents, that I was not giving him the care and attention that he deserved. So he feels really bad about that. So now he's trying to back the cousins, show up for them, be in their corner as much as he possibly can to make up for what he missed when Aaron moved to Columbia, but then also when Andrew later joined him, because Nikki was still in Germany at that point. So while he's in Germany, that's when Nikki meets his boyfriend, Eric, who was his host brother in Germany, and they start dating. And then coming back, I think he took a gap year, but whenever the twins had gone to Palmetto State to play Exy with the Foxes, Nikki also went with them. And like, YMAC invited Nikki to go with them because, like I said in the first video, it was kind of like an insurance policy, like someone to kind of like be the glue for these two monsters. So originally the monsters were Aaron, Andrew, and Nikki. And Nikki by default, because he was trying to be loyal to his family and like show them love and care. So during this conversation, Nikki says, well, maybe if Andrew had a girl to focus on like Aaron does, he would leave Aaron and Caitlin alone and he wouldn't keep like interfering in their relationship. So when is Renee going to make a move? And Neil is like, Renee? What about Renee? Like, and that's when Nikki says, well, yeah, everybody on the team is like placing bets about when Renee and Andrew are going to start dating. Everyone thinks that Renee deserves better. She deserves like a God-fearing Christian boy. And Andrew 1000% is not that. But she seems stuck on him. So why doesn't she just like make a move on him, go after him, and distract him from C-blocking Aaron and Caitlin all the time? And this is what I say. The chances that a man, particularly a straight man, is watching this right now are quite slim. But I want y'all to know, we don't want you to wait for us to make the first move. Don't be creepy and don't be weird and take no for no. But like, if you're interested in a girl, just go after her. You literally have nothing to lose. You already have the patriarchy on your side. Like, why not just try? If you're normal, then girls won't be freaked out when you say, hey, I think you're cute. Do you want to go get a coffee? You're not normal and you're behaving in a very strange way. And that's why girls say, no, I don't like this. Stay away from me. And then you want to say male loneliness epidemic, when really you were being weird and you got consequences, actions, consequences. Weird. Don't nobody want to date you. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that goes for you too, lesbians. Okay? You freakish willowas. All right? You too ask the girls. Okay? It's not every day femme sits around and waits. Some days the femme wants to be approached. What happened to chivalry? Nikki's still on this Neil, you're gay thing. And Neil is really like reflecting on his mother's abuse and how it affected him and his inability to connect with literally anyone but the girls that he's had crushes on in the past. And he's kind of realizing like, I'm kind of not anything, but maybe. I don't know. He's like, I don't know what I am. And then when he gets to practice that day, he sees Renee and Andrew discussing something, and he's like, I wonder if they are going to turn out to be something. At this point in the season, the Foxes are 6-1. And if you don't know anything about sports, here I am to tell you, 6 is the wins that they have. 1 is the losses. So they've lost 1 game at this point and won 6 of them. I literally just said that. And now it is game day against the Ravens. They've been waiting for this game all year. Neil has been waiting for this game since the first book. Okay, I think we're in like mid-October at this point. And the school, for the first time in years, is actually excited for them to play a game because they have the best record that they've had in years. So this is when we learn a little bit more about the racket that poses as an NCAA Division I sports team at Edgar Allan Poe University. Kevin tried explaining Raven synchrony earlier this week, but Neil almost wished he could forget that story. Ravens came to Edgar Allan University for one reason only, to play Exie. Every athlete Coach Moriyama accepted was expected to sign to a professional team upon graduation. School was secondary concern for all of them. They were all enrolled in the same undergraduate degree and took their classes together in groups of 3 or 4. They weren't allowed to go anywhere without taking at least one teammate with them. They weren't allowed to socialize with anyone outside of them. They didn't live in the student dorms, but they didn't live where everyone thought they did either. Edgar Allan was a smaller university than Palmetto State, with fewer sports and more arts programs. One perk they offered was interest-based housing in lieu of general dorms. Sororities, fraternities, and larger clubs could all petition to have special living arrangements. The Exie team had a house of its own, but the Ravens only slept there when keeping up appearances. Evermore wasn't on school grounds for a reason. It belonged to Edgar Allan, but it doubled as the national team's stadium. Because of its dual purpose, Evermore was built with extra amenities. Towers for celebrities in the ERC, lounges for high-profile guests, and spacious living quarters for visiting teams. Those quarters were built underground beneath the court floor, and that was what the Ravens used as their dormitory. That was where Rico and Kevin grew up. If the Ravens weren't in class, they were expected to be at Evermore. They lived and breathed Exie on a scale no other team could or would. Their intense lifestyle, forced integration, and vicious punishments put them on a whole different scale than any of their opponents. They were, in short, the complete opposite of everything the Foxes knew and understood. Tonight's game pitted a hive mind against a fractured bunch of rejects. And that's on what? World building. Exactly. So Wymack threatens Neil and says he needs to get at least 5 points, which is 1 point more than he scored in the last game, or he's going to have to run a marathon, 26 miles. Something tells me that wouldn't be a problem for him because he loves to run, and he voluntarily walked 11 miles in the last book, but I guess being threatened with a marathon isn't fun for anyone. They know they're going to lose, but at this point it's really a question of how bad. Wymack has a bunch of alcohol back at Abby's place for them to either celebrate their win or nurse their loss. And the game ends up being bloody and violent. Okay, it gets violent real quick. The score at halftime is 6-3, which is kind of unprecedented. It's insane that the Foxes have been able to score 3 goals, and it's insane that Andrew has only allowed 6 of the Ravens' goals through as the goalkeeper. And this is when Andrew is still being forced to play full halves, the full game as the goalkeeper. So it's clear that he's losing speed during the second half, but it's accelerated by the fact that the Ravens are running him ragged. Okay, it's like a freight train slamming into a bunch of brick walls. 3 brick walls back to back. I will say 5. I don't understand Andrew's meds. So I've written, no meds is the only way Andrew will play for them because when he's medicated, he's too unpredictable. But when he's unmedicated, he's too apathetic. What is happening? Is it that he's depressed and he won't get out of bed? Or is it that he literally doesn't care about anything? Is it that when he's in withdrawal, he'll play for them? Is that? I don't know. Please explain it to me, because I don't know. Okay. 13-6 is the ending score of the game. And that's the most goals that a team has scored against Andrew. And it's the team's worst play in years. But it is still amazing because Andrew saved 137 goals. Like, the Ravens made 150 shots on goal, and Andrew saved 137 of them. So, like, it's kind of amazing that he only let 13 through. They're going to play again at the semifinals, and when they come together to do the little thing where the teams shake hands at the end, Rico is expecting the Foxes to be very defeated, but they meet him with smiles on their face. They're like, we're proud of ourselves. We're proud of how we played. And the Ravens are like, wait, you let us score 13 goals, and you were, like, really bad. Like, we ran you ragged around the court. And the Foxes are like, yeah, but we only let you score 13 goals. It could have been 500-6. It wasn't. So because they were able to stand an entire game against the Ravens, Wymack decides that he is going to put the roster back to normal and start letting Andrew play halves and subbing Renee in for a half of the game as well. They're really just, like, celebrating their grit at this point. So, like I said, this is like mid-October-ish. Now we're getting into Halloween time. Okay. The monsters go to a party shop to look for Halloween costumes. And while they're at the party shop, they're chatting through costume options. And Andrew lets Neil convince him to invite the upperclassmen to the party that they're going to at Eden's Twilight. How many times am I going to say unprecedented in this video? Okay. Normally the monsters and the upperclassmen do their own thing, especially for, like, celebrations and fun and whatnot. But at this point, Neil is like, he's just, like, talking to Andrew, and he's like, can I invite them? Because remember, at the beginning, Dan has charged him with keeping the peace amongst the two sides of the team. And Andrew is like, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do, but yeah, sure, whatever. While they're at the store, Dan sends Neil this SOS text. So when he gets back to Fox Tower, he has to go talk to her. And when he gets there, she tells him that Officer Higgins, Pig Higgins, from the beginning, wants to talk to Andrew. And she's like, I don't know what's going on. She's basically, like, trying to delay Andrew's arrival, too, because none of them know what's going to happen if Andrew sees Higgins in person. Remember, Higgins lives in Oakland. He's from a part of the Oakland PD. He's at this point flown all the way across the country to talk to Andrew, so it must be about something important. So Andrew comes upstairs and he sees Higgins in the hallway, and he's like, leave me alone, whatever. He's doing his, like, manic Joker act, and Higgins is like, this is important. Like, he tells Andrew in front of Dan, Nikki, and Neil that he's opening an investigation into one of Andrew's former foster families. And we knew at the beginning that it was an investigation into Andrew's former foster father, Richard Spear, but Andrew said Richard Spear is harmless. Like, there's nothing wrong with him. Higgins is there because he's like, I think I finally have the right perp. Like, I think I finally know who the person is. And Andrew's talking to him, and he's like, well, how many kids has she had? And I think Higgins said that she's had 6 kids. Whoever she is, she's had 6 kids since Andrew was living there. Andrew's still like, ugh, whatever. And then Higgins says Drake. And Andrew's like, and he turns on his heel, and he goes upstairs with Higgins. Like, I think they go up to the roof to talk. When he gets back, they're all trying to figure out what happened between Andrew and Higgins, but Andrew won't speak. So they're like, okay, I guess we'll figure it out later. But that's when Neil goes into his room with Matt. The upperclassmen are in the room, and he tells them that Andrew said that they can come to the party at Eden's Twilight. They finally explain that they all have their own kind of, like, Eden's Twilight experience. Like, everyone who Andrew was trying to work out has been taken to Eden's Twilight. And so they finally fully explain what happened with Matt at Eden's Twilight the year prior. So Andrew cleared with Matt's mom to find some way to get Matt to kick his rug habit that he picked up from his dad. So remember, Matt comes from money. Matt's dad is a surgeon, and his mom, no, Matt's dad is a boxer and his mom is a surgeon. I don't know. There's a doctor and a boxer who are in charge of him. And one of them, his dad, was addicted to drugs and was doing them with like all of his friends in front of Matt. And when Matt was very young, he was like, here, take some stuff and try it so that you don't feel left out, whatever. Bad parenting. So he was an addict from quite a young age. Andrew told his mom, I'll figure out some way to get him clean. Andrew and the monsters take Matt to Eden's Twilight, and Andrew gives Matt a speedball. Matt's rug of choice was H, so of course he's gonna love a speedball. Matt OD'd, and then his mom flew to Palmetto to nurse him back to health, and I think this is the second time that Matt goes to rehab. Neil is like, what the fuck? Like, shouldn't Andrew have gotten kicked off of the team for doing that? Like, why is he still here? And Matt says that his mom was very thankful to Andrew for what he did. She convinced the coach to let Andrew stay on the team, and she nursed Matt back to health, and she wasn't mad about it because that was what it finally took to get Matt to kick the habit. And the thing was, like, whenever they had joined the team, whenever Andrew had joined the team, because I think Matt is a junior at the point, or he's a senior, I don't remember, but there were juniors on the team when Matt joined who were really into a lot of like hard stuff. And Matt was getting tempted, and he was getting ready to relapse. And Neil puts it together that Andrew noticed that Matt's sobriety was dancing on a knife's edge. And it was also threatening Aaron's sobriety. Because remember, Nikki told Neil that Aaron had been using his mom's rugs when he moved to Columbia with her a few years prior. So basically, Andrew got Matt clean so that he could keep Aaron on the wagon. And now they all use cracker dust because cracker dust is like something to kind of like keep Aaron interested and keep him from doing the harder stuff, even though it's kind of like a poultry substitute for whatever he must have been doing prior. Everyone is like shocked that Neil has managed to get Andrew to invite the upperclassmen to Sweeties and Eden's Twilight. And they're like, how did you do it? Like, what did you say? And Neil was like, I just asked him. Like, I don't know. Have you tried just asking him? Like, he's actually kind of agreeable if you just like say, hey, can you do this? So they all go to Columbia on Halloween, and they go to Sweeties to get dinner and chat. And it's the first time that the entire team has hung out together in an amicable situation, really ever, since the monsters have joined, at least. Aaron won't talk to anyone, even if they talk to him. He's Aegon Targaryen for a reason. Andrew is high on his meds, and he's just like yapping away. Nikki is yapping too, like a crazy person, because he's so excited to finally get to socialize with the other upperclassmen. He's like, oh my God, I've been wanting to talk to them and like be friends with them for so long that I was sticking by my cousins, but now I'm here and I have my opportunity. And Neil is just like sitting back watching it all. He's like, they go to Eden's Twilight to the Halloween party, and they all have a really great time. They're all drinking, dancing. They get free shots because they've all shown up in costumes. Neil gets a soda. Renee gets a soda because she's sober. Matt also gets a soda, I think. They're just like having a nice old grand old time. And then Neil corners Andrew, and he's like asking him about the status of him and Renee. He's like, what's going on between you two? And Andrew's like, I don't know, like, it doesn't matter. Like, don't ask me that, basically. But Neil is like, everyone on the team is placing bets about when you two are going to get together. So what is it? And Andrew is evasive, as Andrew usually is when he thinks Neil is asking him a stupid question. He's basically like laughing in his face at this point. So Neil the next day decides that he's going to find Renee after class. And Renee reveals that the year prior, Andrew had also invited her to Eden's Twilight to try and like suss her out. So Andrew at this point has invited Matt, Dan, and Renee to Eden's Twilight. He invited Renee because he was trying to figure out the same thing that Neil was trying to figure out, which is what's going on with this. Like the dyed hair, the Christ thing. You're so nice, but you seem to have a rough background. What's going on? And then with Dan, he was trying to figure out if she was going to be a worthy leader for the team, someone who he should or could actually listen to. So this is when Renee tells Neil her backstory. She grew up in a kind of a tricky household with a single mother who had very, as she puts it, heavy-handed boyfriends. And as a way to escape that, she joined a gang in Detroit. She gets arrested and she thinks on the gang, and her mom and her mom's boyfriend at the time end up getting arrested. When they get arrested, they get sent to prison and they end up getting beaten to death in prison by the gang that Renee finked on. So Renee is, when she goes to juvie for a year after like giving evidence as part of a plea deal, basically. And when she gets out, she's put into the foster care system. And she says to Neil, like, she should feel bad that, like, her actions led to 2 deaths, but she kind of just, like, doesn't care. Like, she's just glad to be away from her mom and her mom's horrible boyfriends. So she, like, cycles through a bunch of foster families and she gives them all hell. And then finally, Renee Walker takes her in and moves her, not Renee Walker. Finally, Stephanie Walker takes her in and moves her to North Dakota, teaches her the way of Christ. Renee becomes a Christian, and that's how we kind of meet her as who she is now. She doesn't go into a lot of detail about what she did while she was in the gang, but like basically she's like, I've had a very rough childhood, and part of the reason that me and Andrew connect is because we were both in the system. We both know what it's like to be like at rock bottom and to have Exie as something that brings us back, basically. So Neil is asking Renee about her life, and he basically calls like getting to know his teammates something to do while he waits for the Moriyamas to him. And while they're having this conversation, several bombs are dropped, okay? So Renee is talking to Neil, and she says, Andrew said you would have questions for me. I asked him what he wanted me to say if you came by, but he said he didn't care and didn't have time to play moderator. If he knew this is what you wanted to talk about, I'll assume he knew this would come up. Renee put the wallet back, let her fingers linger for a few seconds longer as she debated, then turned to face Neil fully. When I said I wasn't Andrew's type, I meant it. It's not about my looks or faith. It's that I'm a woman. Neil heard her words, but was slow to understand them. He blinked at her in confusion, blinked again, when it clicked and said a little too loudly, Oh, then Andrew and Kevin. Renee laughed and waved that off. Oh no, you'll meet Kevin's girlfriend later this year, I'm sure. You're lying. Neil stared at her. Kevin doesn't have a girlfriend. He's under too much scrutiny from the press and his fans to hide that kind of a thing. Renee cased the store in a slow, easy look. This time of day, there's only one customer, and he was on the far side of the store from them. They're not official, and Kevin knows better than to be indiscreet. Can you imagine what Coach Moriyamas might do if a woman distracted Kevin from his game? I'm sure it doesn't surprise you that she is a court-ranked player. Kevin needs someone who can keep up with and challenge him. Fortunately, she's also a Raven alumnus, so she knows the repercussions of getting caught with Kevin. Maybe they'll have more luck after we've settled things with the Ravens this year. Thea? Neil asked, startled. Renee smiled at how quickly he put it together. Impressive. Okay, so he puts together very quickly that this Thea person is Kevin's unofficial girlfriend. It takes him 1.5 books. One and a half books to put together that Andrew is gay. Big dumb dummy. He's so observant. He's so intelligent, but he's a big dumb dummy. I felt like something gay was, I'm going to tell you, I first read this book series with no information about it. I didn't know what was going to happen. I felt like something gay was going to happen from the beginning, though. I was like, sports and men, gay. I thought it was going to be Kevin and Neil. So the whole first book I'm reading, looking for subtext between Kevin and Neil, I can't find any. I'm so confused. The whole first book and a half, and I'm just like Neil, so smart, big dumb dummy. We're the same. Me and this man, the same. Okay. Because the whole first book and a half I'm reading, I'm going, what the fuck is wrong with him? What's wrong with him? Why is he kidnapping people and drugging them against their will, asking them a bunch of random questions? Why is he threatening baby girl when all he did was show up and play a sport? Why don't he believe him? What's the situation with him and Kevin? Why he's so committed to protecting him? Why you have a twin brother who he doesn't know? What's going on? I didn't understand him. And so I wrote him off because I was like, this is too much of an enigma. Too much of an enigma wrapped in a chimera stuffed in a sphinx for me to figure out what's going on right now. when I found out he was gay. When I found out he was gay. When I found out he was gay, I said, oh, I'm locked in. Locked in. Because then I said, you know that math meme where the numbers are just flat? I said, so where is this going? I wasn't sure at this point, but I said, I'm starting to understand a lot more about him and why he's so enigmatic and confusing and cagey and lying and what's going on between him and Renee. This is his hag. This is the only girl who understands him. He's annoyed by Nikki because Nikki is happy to play the gay stereotype. And he's like, you don't have to do that. You could just be yourself. But Nikki does it because as like comic relief to smooth the creases between the two sides of the group. But he's like, you don't have to do that. Just be yourself. And Nikki doesn't know how to do that. So he's annoyed. This is his hag. His hag. I said, locked in. I am here with Mr. Andrew Vineyard. Okay. I am here with Mr. Andrew Vineyard. At this point, the jury's still out on this one. I still don't know how to feel about this one. I get very annoyed when people can't get over things. Okay. I know maybe your brother caused a fatal car accident that led to your mother's passing. She was beating on you. I'm with Neil. I'm like, she did you a favor. But, you know. She also abandoned said brother in the foster system. And then when somebody tried to call to get them to meet up, she was like, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with him. Who is he, the Antichrist? No. Was it that the vibes just weren't right? No. That's your baby. You gave birth to him with this one at the same time. You freak. So I'm kind of like, the world is better off without Tilda, but that's me. That's a fictional lady, okay? So Aaron and Andrew's birthday is coming up. We're firmly in like November at this point. Yeah, it's the 1st of November. We're firmly in November at this point. So that means that they're Scorpios. Again, the math was mathing. I said, Andrew is a Scorpio. Suspicious, calculating, but secretly has a heart of gold? ? I get him. Renee basically tells Neil in this moment, they're like in the shop. She's like, I'm looking for something to get for the twins. And she basically tells Neil in this moment to get over himself. Like, stop holding back from everyone. They get back from the shop. They get back to Fox Tower. And Nikki is frantic. He like runs into Neil's room frantic. And he's like, I don't know what's going on. And Neil is like, what's happening? And Nikki says that his mom has just called and asked Nikki, Andrew, and Aaron to come to Nikki's family home for Thanksgiving. Now, Nikki really wants to go because he has not seen his parents in years. They've basically stopped speaking to him ever since he came out to them. Said that like he went to Germany and got gayed, you know? And he says like his mom only calls him to ask if he's accepted the love of Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior. His dad doesn't speak to him at all, basically. So this will be his first time back in his family home since essentially losing his parents because they've decided not to love him anymore because whatever. So Nikki's parents are inviting Aaron and Andrew to the house with Nikki for Thanksgiving, but their one stipulation is that Aaron and Andrew must come. The invitation is void if Aaron and Andrew don't show up. So it's not like they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They want the twins to be there. And Nikki runs into Neil. Neil's like, okay, what the fuck does that have to do with me? Like, what? But Nikki runs into Neil's room because he wants Neil to convince Andrew to let him go and to go with him and convince Aaron to go too. And Neil's like, okay, why are you asking me? And Nikki's like, because you're the only person that Andrew says yes to. I have known this plight, okay? When I was a child, I was the only person that my dad would say yes to. So there were many a time when I was sent out into the living room by multiple grown adults. By grown adults, I mean my sister who was 5 years older than me, my brother who was 9 years older than me, and my mother who was 36 years older than me, to ask my father to do things. Worked really well when I was this high. And this many. The older I got, the less it worked. But Andrew hates Luther. Like, Andrew doesn't want to go. Luther is Nikki's dad. Andrew doesn't want to go because he hates Luther. So this is basically why he hates Luther. Last time I checked, we're not your friends either, Neil said. You still put up with us, so why won't you tolerate Luther? Nikki assumes it has to do with the way you met, but Luther's the one who got you out of juvie and back home with your mother, isn't he? She was not my mother. Andrew waited a beat to make sure Neil understood and made a cutting gesture with his hand. Cass, though. Cass? She would have been. She really wanted to be, though. You don't know. Here's a story for you, Neil. Listening? Cass wanted to keep me. She wanted to adopt me. Andrew Joseph Spear, she said. She collected all the paperwork. She wouldn't file without my consent. She thought I was old enough to choose. Spear, Neil echoed, startled, like Richard Spear. Andrew finished for him. I told you all about him, yes? My last foster father? You mentioned him, Neil said slowly, startling as he tried to process that bombshell. Richard Spear was the father Phil Higgins tried investigating in August. All Andrew said about him was that he was uninteresting and harmless. What happened to make the adoption fall through? Your arrest? No, you have it backwards. I went to juvie because she wanted to adopt me. But she didn't give up on me. She thought a stable home could straighten me out, she said. Her biological son wanted to join the Marines after high school, so she even offered to reallocate part of his college fund to me. She wanted me to have a future, my own Stephanie Walker of a sort. Neil only recognized that name because he just talked to Renee. He nodded to show he was following. Andrew rocked on the balls of his feet and reached for Neil. It was all Neil could do not to tense up when Andrew's hands wrapped around his neck. Andrew didn't hold tight enough to cut off air, but tapped his thumbs against Neil's throat in time to Neil's pulse. Luther would have let her have me if it was what I wanted. He knew Aaron's mother wanted nothing to do with me, but he wanted to make things right with me somehow. If Cass was right, he would fight on her behalf to get the adoption approved. Couldn't have that, could we? Why not? Neil asked, searching Andrew's expression. What did Cass do to you? Andrew looked surprised. Cass would never do anything to me. Then what went wrong? That's a different story. This story is about Cass and Luther, isn't it? Luther said he could send me back to Cass. I gave him a secret to make sure he wouldn't. And he told someone, Neil guessed. No. Andrew tapped his fingers a little faster in agitated rhythm, completely at odds with a mocking smile on his lips. That's too easy. These kinds of secrets are not given out lightly, you know that. We calculate collateral damage and escape routes. We plan and brace for the reaction and fallout. But Luther did not tell. He chose not to believe me at all. That's 1,000 times worse, you see. That depends on the secret, Neil said. True, Andrew said. Andrew let go of Neil and wheeled away. Maybe it comes as a surprise to you, Neil, but I'm not a very trusting person. Tell a man that the sky is blue. If I tell a man the sky is blue and he tells me I am wrong, I am not inclined to give him a second chance. I see no reason to. So did Luther not believe you, or did he say you were wrong? Neil asked. There's a significant difference between the two. Oh. Andrew half turned to face him again. Sometimes I forget you are sharper than you look. Neil struggled with his memory, knowing the answer was right out of reach. He thought about Higgins' visit, Nikki's parents, and then Neil remembered sitting across from Andrew on a bench in the locker room to ask about Higgins' first phone call. He thought Andrew's parting words strange, but he hadn't understood at the time. He wasn't sure he'd drawn the right conclusions now, but it was worth a shot. He said it was a misunderstanding. The way Andrew went so perfectly still, if only for a second, told Neil he was right. Shh. Andrew said, soft like he was reassuring a cornered animal. Shh, don't say that. I hate the sound of that word. I warned you once, so you'd know better than to use it again. Why would you risk it? Andrew, Neil started. No. We have the pieces. Now how to put them together, okay? So all of the monsters... So Neil basically convinces Andrew to go to Nikki's house, even though he hates Luther, because he says to Andrew, why don't we all go? Why don't all of us monsters go? I'm going to force Kevin to come. I'm going to go. It'll be amusing for you to see how we all, interact in that kind of, hyper-Christian environment. Andrew demands that they change the trip to a different day because he's refusing to spend the holidays with Nikki's family. So now they're going to go the next Sunday, the Sunday after, the Sunday that's coming up, instead of going on Thanksgiving. And everyone, again, is curious about why Andrew only says yes to Neil. I'm sure you can guess, but that's not for me to say. Neil, at this point, is like, he's thinking that he's worried that Andrew will attack Luther and like get arrested and ruin the Fox's season by like being impulsive, basically. So the week passes by. They're gearing up for their last game of the season against J.D. Campbell University. On the Sunday that they're supposed to go to Nikki's family's house, they stop in Columbia first at this like XC supply shop to get Neil a new racket. Kevin is saying that Neil needs a heavier racket in order to really compete against the Ravens in the way that he knows that he can, like to fulfill his potential, basically. So they have this game against J.D. Campbell, which is the only team that is ranked lower than the Foxes at this point. So Neil is like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to test out a different racket because it'll like throw him off a little bit to be using something that's a little bit heavier than he's used to. So it's good to go to do it on like a light game. They have one game the first week of December, and then it's the winter banquet with the like XC, the ERC, I think is what the XC thing is called. And then it's winter break. So after they go racket shopping, they're going to go to Nikki's family home. I'm going to finish filming this tomorrow because it is 11:30 p.m.